A child was taken from the outer rim, not stolen, not rescued, selected. The Jedi called it a tradition. But for the people of Pao City, it felt like a funeral. No one wept, no one cheered. They simply handed the child over, tall for his age, silent beyond his years, and turned away as the shuttle lifted. They knew what he would become, but not what he would destroy. He was born on the dark side of Utapau, where the winds never stopped screaming, where survival meant silence and strength. The kind of strength the Jedi feared. They tested his blood, midichlorians elevated. They studied his gaze, cold, still, a mind already calculating. The masters whispered to each other, noting how he didn't ask questions, didn't cry, didn't laugh. He just watched, and in the temple, that never changed. While the other initiates trained with wooden sabers, the Pau'an boy sat alone, memorizing tactics from holobooks written centuries before. He didn't dream of lightsabers, he dreamed of formations, of traps, of calculated victory. The Jedi encouraged curiosity, peace, and detachment. But he wasn't curious. He didn't seek peace, and what he detached from was mercy. Even as a youngling, he moved differently. Every step was measured, every word chosen with caution. His teachers called him disciplined. His peers called him something else, cold. He excelled at lightsaber training, but not because he loved it. He excelled because he had to. Because losing, even in training, was an insult he would not accept. When paired with other students, he broke form to win. He ignored limits, he improvised. He treated sparring like combat, and combat like war. Once, he disarmed a fellow Padawan with such violence that the training blade shattered. The masters called it imbalance. He called it reality. They spoke of compassion. He spoke of consequences. When Jedi younglings discussed dreams of future, missions of peacekeeping and diplomacy, the Pau'an child stayed quiet. He didn't see the Jedi as peacekeepers. He saw them as generals who pretended they weren't, and part of him resented that. He had read the histories. He knew the truth buried in the archives, how Jedi once led battalions, how their lightsabers once cut through Mandalorian armor, not just droids. He admired that version of the Order, the one the Council pretended had never existed. His masters tried to guide him, tried to mold him into the Jedi they needed, but he listened to instruction like it was theory, not law. He didn't rebel. He simply obeyed without faith. By the time he was assigned a master, he already had opinions on the flaws of the Council's teachings. He knew what he was. He just didn't know what the galaxy would call him yet. They gave him robes, they gave him rules. But deep inside, the temple could never quiet the rhythm in his mind. Prepare, predict, win. That rhythm never stopped, not during meditation, not during meals, not even when his fellow Padawans slept beside him in the quiet of the dormitories. Because to him, sleep wasn't rest. It was a pause in vigilance. And Jedi who paused for too long forgot how to fight. They called him Padawan, but he didn't call them anything. His master was a Mirialan, named Sel Darve, wise, measured, a Jedi who believed in patience before punishment, silence before judgment. But even he couldn't reach the boy. From the very beginning, their bond was functional, nothing more. No warmth, no mentoring tales under starlight, only missions, only orders. They were assigned to the Mid-Rim, a quiet region at the time. Drought disputes, mining collapses, political instability. Soft conflicts, the kind that required negotiation, not violence. But he watched these worlds with a soldier's eyes. He didn't see problems, he saw vulnerabilities. Where the Jedi offered compassion, he saw opportunity. Where they sought balance, he saw imbalance left to rot. He never said it aloud, but his silence carried the weight of judgment. He trained harder than anyone. Hours past regulation, days without rest. He perfected every form not to honor the Jedi, but to surpass them. Form 3, Soresu, the defensive form. He dismantled it until it became something offensive. A trap, a lure. Form V, Gem So, the power form. He adapted it until his strikes shattered practice droids with single blows. His dueling instructors began to limit his partners. Not because he was reckless, but because he never lost. And when he did, he didn't speak for days. The other Padawans began to avoid him. They feared his eyes, not angry, not sad. Just watching. It wasn't hate, it was something worse. He believed they were soft. During a mission to Kinyan, he witnessed a local militia slaughter innocent civilians under a peace treaty the Jedi had negotiated. His master told him it was not their jurisdiction. That political neutrality must be preserved. But the boy didn't blink. He stared at the militia compound for hours. And that night, it burned. No lives were lost. No proof remained. Only rumor. His master never confronted him. But he knew. From that day forward, Master Vey stopped speaking during hyperspace travel. The silence between them stretched from system to system. The Council sensed disturbance, but not enough to intervene. Promising, but dangerous, one said. A weapon without emotion, another whispered. But the galaxy was changing. Whispers of war began to echo through outer rim space. Criminal syndicates were growing stronger. Sith ruins had been uncovered in the unknown regions. The Jedi needed warriors, and he was ready. He was knighted at 19, younger than most, feared by some, respected by few. He didn't celebrate, he didn't speak. He simply stepped forward, accepted his saber, and bowed. Not to honor the moment, but to end it. From that day on, he worked alone. One-man missions, precision assaults, neutralizing threats the Council didn't want made public. He asked for no Padawan. He trained no one. He built nothing. He simply obeyed the mission and rewrote the result. They say the Jedi bring peace, but he brought order, and in his eyes, the two were never the same. By the time he reached his 30s, his name was spoken with caution across the temple. Some called him an asset, others called him a shadow, but no one called him friend. Because there was something in him no one could approach. A stillness too sharp, a discipline too cold, a clarity that did not leave room for empathy. The Jedi didn't know what he was becoming, but he did. He wasn't becoming Sith, not yet. He was becoming ready. He was not like the others, where most Jedi saw the lightsaber as a symbol. He saw it as a tool. Where most sought the balance between blade and spirit, he sought mastery. He did not believe in peace through understanding. He believed in peace through power. Even among the Jedi Knights, he was rare not because of his darkness, but because of his clarity. He was assigned missions no one else wanted. Sieges, hostage rescues, political threats too delicate for Republic soldiers, and he completed them all, quietly, efficiently, without failure. But something began to fracture. It started in his movements too sharp, in his language too exact, in his victories too complete. He began altering lightsaber forms in secret. Soresu, once defensive, became a trap. Makashi, once elegant, became lethal at close range. Even Juayo, forbidden to most, was absorbed piece by piece. Behind closed doors, He wasn't reckless. He was precise. But his precision frightened them. The council started watching, not openly, not with accusation, but with unease. In the temple halls, his footsteps were always alone. He was invited to speak at combat lectures, but never invited twice. He shared insights the others didn't want to hear. That Jedi needed armor, that droids couldn't win wars, that saber training without real fear was nothing but ritual. The archives recorded him as brilliant, but brilliance can be a threat, especially when it is untouched by humility. His missions grew bloodier, but never uncontrolled. He neutralized pirate fleets, silenced corrupt planetary governors, and dismantled separatist cells before they could even form. But he never reported everything. And what he left out were the moments that mattered. The way he watched enemies beg and did not blink. The way he used force techniques restricted by the Order not out of rage, but efficiency. He didn't torture. He didn't kill out of anger. He simply finished. There was one mission the records sealed, where he led a Republic strike team into the underbelly of Nal Hutta. The mission succeeded, but none of the clones returned, only him. He said they were ambushed, that he had no choice. But the temple never confirmed his version, and when asked to debrief, he refused. He told them only this: "You sent me to win. I won." Some began to wonder if he was slipping toward the dark side, but that was the problem. He wasn't. He showed no hatred, no fear, no attachments, no rage, only control. And that made it harder to stop him, because he was what the Jedi claimed to want: emotionless, disciplined, focused. But beneath that silence, he was hiding something even worse than anger. Conviction. He had stopped believing in the Jedi Code. He didn't break it. He outgrew it. To him, it was a relic, a set of ancient lines written for a galaxy that no longer existed. He believed in action, in strength, in results, and in the whisper of a future only he seemed willing to prepare for. A future where diplomacy would fail, where peace would shatter, where war would return not in shadows, but in fire. And he intended to meet that war not as a Jedi, but as a weapon. It began with whispers, small, distant, echoes that carried his name through the marble halls of the temple. Knights spoke quietly of his missions, of how they ended before they began, of how enemies surrendered before battle, and of how he seemed untouched by victory or loss. The council summoned him more often, not for punishment, for observation. They called it guidance. He called it scrutiny. Their questions were polite but pointed. Do you still meditate? Do you feel the Force as peace? Do you remember why we fight? He answered every question with precision. Yes, yes, always. But the truth was fading beneath those words. Meditation had become emptiness. Peace had become distraction. And purpose had become personal. The Jedi Masters felt it, though they could not name it. A coldness in him that was not hatred, but separation. As if he had already left the Order in spirit, even while standing before them. He continued serving the Republic flawlessly, but his reports grew shorter, his eyes darker. When they spoke of patience, he spoke of preparation. When they warned of pride, he spoke of necessity. And when they told him that strength without serenity leads to ruin, he did not respond. Because deep inside, he no longer believed serenity was strength. He had seen what peace did to the galaxy. It made it soft, predictable, unready. He began training alone in the temple's lower chambers, rooms that hadn't been entered in centuries. He accessed archives labeled restricted, downloading ancient holo-recordings of battle meditation, of Sith war strategies, of pre-Republic conflicts, not to mimic them, to understand them. And slowly, the line between light and shadow blurred not by passion, but by logic. He was not falling to darkness, he was walking toward it with open eyes. During a sparring demonstration, before the council, he faced 3 knights at once. He disarmed them in under 10 seconds. He didn't injure them, he humiliated them. And when the Grand Master stood, the room fell silent. Not because of pride, but because they all felt the same thing. The force around him no longer flowed with calm. It pulsed with intent. That night, his master, now old, frail, and haunted, came to his quarters. He asked only one question: "Do you still serve the Force?" The Pawan looked at him for a long time before answering, "I serve what the Force should be." It was not defiance, it was faith twisted by vision. Days later, he was asked to step away from combat duties, to meditate, to heal, to realign. He agreed outwardly, but within, he was already finished with the Jedi. He had seen the cracks in their peace, the fear in their courage, the indecision in their wisdom. And he knew what must come next. He would not renounce the Order, he would outgrow it. He would show them that serenity without strength is surrender. That their peace would one day shatter beneath the weight of their own inaction. And when that day came, the galaxy would remember one truth. He had warned them. He was the storm they refused to believe in. And soon, he would prove that even light can be broken by discipline alone. He didn't seek battle, but when it came, he was always ready. The Republic was beginning to fracture. Small systems were pulling away. Trade routes were raided. Outposts disappeared without record. And in the silence, the Jedi were sent not as soldiers, but as symbols. He knew the difference, and he rejected it. When the Council asked him to observe tensions in the Merodi sector, he returned with enemy leaders in chains. When they asked him to negotiate in the Roche asteroids, he returned with stolen cargo, liberated slaves, and a decimated pirate fleet. He never disobeyed. He simply didn't hesitate. He didn't wait for violence to begin. He ended it before it could start. The Republic Defense Coalition started requesting him by name. They called him the Quiet Saber, the one who didn't speak unless it mattered, the one who never left witnesses when the mission allowed it. Other Jedi noticed. They whispered in temple corridors. Some envied him, some feared him, but none could match him. He was called to Coruscant's inner chambers for debriefings too sensitive for archive. He stood before senators who tried to look brave in his presence. They mistook his silence for humility, but it was discipline. It was calculation. It was detachment they couldn't understand, because he didn't serve them. He served the mission. In a campaign on the edge of the Senex Juvex sector, he led a surgical strike into the fortified palace of a rogue noble family harboring Sith relics. No backup, no warning, no survivors. He returned to the Jedi Temple before the senators even realized the threat had been eliminated. The council didn't applaud him. They asked for answers. Why hadn't he consulted them before acting? He said only this: there was no time, and there is less time now. That sentence became legend, but not the kind Jedi speak of proudly. Soon, he was assigned command roles in joint Republic Jedi initiatives across contested sectors. He led clone detachments before the Clone Wars ever began. He taught officers how to end conflicts in days, not years. And when a Republic admiral asked him what the Jedi believed about war, he answered without flinching, "We don't believe. We prepare." His name began to drift through military halls with the same weight as a general, even though he wore Jedi robes. He didn't build battalions. He built fear, not with cruelty, with precision. He could walk into a battlefield, study terrain for less than a minute, and know exactly where the enemy would fold. He didn't shout commands, he gave quiet orders, and they were obeyed. Once, during an ambush on Almec, he positioned 6 Jedi and 12 soldiers in a way that turned a death trap into a perfect funnel. The enemy lost 200 fighters in under 6 minutes. He recorded the tactics later, submitted the strategy to the Jedi archives, but the archivists refused to publish it. They said it was too aggressive, too clinical, too dangerous to inspire imitation. He didn't protest. He had stopped expecting approval, because he had learned something deeper than doctrine. The Jedi feared not just the dark side, they feared strength without permission. And he no longer needed theirs. He never lost control, not once. Even in the heat of fire, his breath remained steady, his blade never wavered. And his voice, when he spoke, cut sharper than the saber in his hand. He did not believe in overwhelming force. He believed in minimal force applied perfectly. It became his signature. In a campaign on Lenico IV, a full Republic battalion was pinned down by insurgents using subterranean passages and shielded artillery. The Jedi Council prepared to send reinforcements. He requested to go alone. 3 days later, he returned with 12 prisoners, 6 deactivated weapons cores, and 0 civilian casualties. The mission logs were so precise they read like mechanical reports, timestamps, kill patterns, threat analysis, measured by seconds, not minutes. The Republic awarded him a tactical citation. The Jedi gave him silence. He wasn't disobeying, but he was evolving. Faster than they could understand, he began teaching small unit tactics unofficially. Republic captains, clone commanders, even a few Jedi Knights came to him privately. He never charged, never advertised. He simply shared what he knew, and what he knew was how to win. Not by rage, not by emotion, by removing both. In battle, he never yelled. He pointed, he moved, he ended. One knight who shadowed him during a joint operation described it as terrifying not because of brutality, but because of calm. He didn't hesitate. He didn't celebrate. He just removed threats. His leadership wasn't inspiring. It was efficient. And in war, that was rarer than courage. Over time, he developed drills the Republic would later adopt during the Clone Wars. Close quarter clearing, urban infiltration, staggered strike timing based on wind, gravity, and line of sight disruption. He created them in the field, while under fire, and recorded them in spare moments between hyperspace jumps. He never wrote theory, only proven patterns. But with every victory, the divide grew wider. The Jedi believed in showing the galaxy that the Force was balance. He believed the galaxy had to be reminded that balance only exists when darkness is removed, and that sometimes removal requires silence, not speeches. During a siege on Karida, he led a Jedi-led militia into a fortified weapons depot. They expected weeks of combat. He ended it in 7 hours. Only afterward did the Council discover he had used tactics once modeled after ancient Sith war doctrines. Not rituals, not rage, just logic they had buried. Formations used by the Brotherhood of Darkness. Trap algorithms dating back to the new Sith Wars. They called him in, sat him. Before the full council, he did not argue. He explained, "There is no darkness in a pattern, only in how it is used." But that answer didn't comfort them. They didn't fear his methods. They feared how effective they were. He hadn't fallen, he hadn't disobeyed. But he had proven something none of them wanted to face. That the Jedi could lose the war before it began because they had trained to survive, but not to win. And still, he remained loyal. Still, he wore the robes. Still, he returned to the temple after every campaign, entered quietly, and left without applause. He didn't need their approval. He needed results. But in the silence of those marble halls, a tension began to rise, because even perfection can sound like betrayal. He never raised his voice. Not once. Even when the council questioned his loyalty, he spoke with the stillness of a man already beyond their reach. It began after the siege of Antioch. The battle was clean, fast, surgical, and wrong. Because the victory came at a cost the council would not speak of. He had predicted a counterattack, warned the commanders, requested authorization to strike first to dismantle the ambush before it began. The order was denied. "Patience," they said. "Do not let fear dictate your hand." So he obeyed. He waited. And in that hesitation, 47 Republic soldiers died. 2 Jedi Knights among them. He didn't shout. He didn't grieve. He simply returned to Coruscant, stood before the masters, and asked a single question. How many more must die before patience becomes negligence? No one answered. Not Yarel Poof, not Ki-Adi-Mundi, not even the Grand Master himself. Because deep down, they knew what he said was true. But truth, in the Jedi Temple, was only welcome when it sounded like peace. He was reassigned. A quiet punishment disguised as honor. Advisory duty at the Republic's tactical command on Corellia. Far from the front lines. Far from relevance, he accepted it, at least outwardly. But inside, something began to fracture not his loyalty, but his trust. He had believed the Jedi fought to preserve life. But now he saw they fought to preserve image. They wanted to be seen as guardians, not generals, as saviors, not strategists. And he had become proof of what they denied, that peace was not maintained by words alone. So he began teaching the officers in secret, not as a Jedi, but as a warrior. He taught them when to strike first, when to show mercy, and when to forget it entirely. Rumors reached the temple that he was encouraging violence, that he was corrupting the Republic with ideas of control. The council summoned him once more, but this time, he didn't defend himself. He asked them instead, "If the Sith return, will you debate them into surrender?" The silence that followed was heavy, ancient, and final. He was warned, told to step back from command, to reconnect with the Force, told that his obsession with efficiency bordered on darkness. He didn't argue. He simply bowed. But the moment he turned away, the decision was made. He would no longer fight under their permission, because permission was weakness. He began refusing non-essential orders, mission transfers, protocol briefings, political negotiations that served nothing but optics. He wasn't rebelling, he was purifying, stripping away the layers that made the Jedi slow, indecisive, human. In his mind, he was fixing the order, but to them, he was breaking it. During one mission on Brental IV, he defied a direct command to withdraw when a local militia executed civilians under Jedi watch. He intervened not as diplomat, but executioner. When he returned, they stripped him of command. No court, no trial, just silence. And the sentence every warrior fears most: irrelevance. But what they didn't realize was this. He wasn't afraid of losing rank. He was afraid of losing purpose. And purpose was already gone. The council thought they were saving him from darkness, but all they did was push him closer to it. The temple was quiet the day they called him in. No alarms, no accusations, just silence. He walked through the grand halls without a guard, without his lightsaber. It was not taken from him. He had left it behind, out of choice, not fear. Inside the war room, the masters waited, dozens of them, their robes perfectly still, their expressions carved from the same regret they used on every Jedi who strayed too far. They said his name softly. Then they asked what he had become. He didn't answer. He stood before them like a shadow given form, tall, motionless, unreadable. His voice, when it came, was low, controlled. I did everything you asked. I saved worlds. I stopped wars before they began. And now you tell me I've done too much. They didn't deny it. They only spoke of compassion, of restraint, of the danger of a heart untouched by empathy. He listened, and in that silence, they mistook obedience for acceptance. When they were done, he looked around the chamber at the marble walls, the floating holomaps, the rows of faces that had never known what it meant to bleed. He said, "You fear what you built." A few masters lowered their eyes. One tried to interrupt him, but he continued, "You train us to be weapons. You send us into battle. You ask us to die without anger. But when one of us learns how to win, you call it darkness." The room went still. No one dared to speak, because they had all felt it before, the unspoken hypocrisy, the need for warriors who were never allowed to admit they enjoyed victory. He bowed his head, as if in respect. But the words that followed were not forgiveness. "I will not serve fear," the Grand Master sighed. "We fear only the loss of balance." He looked up, and balance is what you've already lost. There was no shouting, no punishment, no exile. The Jedi never expelled him. They simply let him fade quietly, politically, deliberately. His missions were reassigned, his name removed from rotation, his quarters relocated to the outer dormitories of the temple, and the council stopped calling. But they were too late. The silence they gave him became space, and in that space, something began to take shape. He still trained, still meditated, still walked the halls of the temple at night, watching the city lights of Coruscant burn through the windows. But he no longer felt part of it. He was inside, yet already gone. To the younger Jedi, he became myth, the warrior who defied the masters and survived, the one who spoke only when words carried consequence. To the council, he became an error they pretended had been corrected. But deep within the archives, his combat logs still existed, filed away, sealed behind restricted access, labeled classified, tactical abnormalities. He had shown them the truth. They chose not to see it, and so he disappeared, not from the Order, but from belief. The Jedi thought silence would contain him, but silence was where he was born. And in that stillness, something ancient began to whisper, a hunger not for power, but for purpose. A call that had been waiting for centuries, echoing beyond the rim of Jedi space. The war within him was over, but another had already begun. He didn't say goodbye, not to the Order, not to the temple, not to the galaxy he had once served. One morning, his quarters were empty. His robes remained folded, his lightsaber left behind, not discarded, but set down like a weapon no longer needed. No report was filed, no farewell message recorded, only silence. And in that silence, the Jedi chose to look away. He had not been expelled, but he had not been forgiven either. In their minds, he had simply left. Another knight who lost his way. One more footnote in the long, silent history of the Order's failures. But the truth was darker. He didn't leave because he was lost. He left because he had seen the end of something sacred. And it no longer included him. The Outer Rim was where Jedi missions went to die. Lawless, empty, forgotten. Even the Republic's borders ended there, dissolving into the uncharted chaos of hyperspace lanes and failed colonies. That's where he went. Not in fear, not in hiding, in search. For what? Even he didn't fully know. He passed through Sirion space, crossed the edges of Topani sector, and vanished beyond Lantilles into the systems where maps no longer mattered. He found ruin, ancient debris fields, space stations consumed by vines, mining moons torn open by greed, then left to bleed vacuum. And on some of those worlds, echoes, whispers of things older than the Jedi. Ruins that bore no Republic record. Walls etched with symbols the archives had once labeled corruptive. But he wasn't afraid. He didn't come to preserve. He came to understand. He traded with smugglers who didn't ask for names. He fought off pirates who only saw a lone traveler with no escort. He survived 3 assassination attempts in less than a year, and none of the bodies were ever found. He grew leaner, harder, quieter. His robes changed, stitched together from battle cloth and armor weave scavenged from wrecked outposts. He no longer called himself Jedi, but he didn't yet have another name. Not yet. In one nameless system near the edge of wild space, he spent 9 weeks studying the remnants of a structure built into a cliff face. No one lived there. No one had in thousands of years. But the walls were filled with carvings not of Sith or Jedi or Republic victories. They were records of wars without names. Fallen warriors who fought not for power but for survival. It was there, in that forgotten place, that something changed, not in his mind, in his posture, in his breath, in his stillness. He no longer moved like a knight. He moved like something else trained in every form, bound by no form. A body that remembered war not as trauma, but as truth. The Force still flowed through him, but now it did not resist his will. It obeyed. He no longer meditated for peace. He meditated for clarity, to prepare, to sharpen, because even in exile, he felt what the others refused to see. Something was coming. Not just war. Correction. And when it came, the galaxy would need warriors, not watchers. Masters of execution, not patience. The Jedi believed he had vanished, but in reality, he was becoming. Not a Sith. Not yet, but something shaped by everything the Jedi had denied. He had no map, no plan, only direction. And it took him where the Jedi never dared to look, into the bones of fallen empires, buried beneath time and silence. There were no teachers, no mentors waiting in exile, just ghosts. But ghosts can teach, too. On the surface of an abandoned moon near Atravis sector, he found a derelict warship half sunken into volcanic ash. Its hull still bore traces of Mandalorian sigils, faded, fractured, scorched from orbital fire. Inside, he found the remains of warriors who had died without surrender. Their armor cracked, their weapons still in hand. He stayed there for days, not in mourning, in study. He documented the blast, patterns, measured tactical positions, analyzed the patterns of resistance. It wasn't about death, it was about discipline. Elsewhere, in the ruins of a collapsed Sith temple on Renvar, he found carvings of battle meditations. techniques meant to fracture the minds of armies through the Force alone. He did not perform the rituals. He didn't need to. He simply memorized the framework, stripped away the myth, and kept the structure. He learned how Sith wrote their strategies in layers, how they concealed intent beneath symbols, how they encoded command logic into art, how they planned for betrayal as naturally as Jedi planned for diplomacy. These were not secrets he worshipped, they were tools, and he was sharpening them. He began constructing his own routines. Hybrid forms of Jedi breathing paired with physical regimens stolen from Sith war manuals. He trained under different conditions each week: zero gravity, toxic winds, extreme heat, sensory deprivation, not to test endurance, to prepare for any battlefield. His lightsaber, once left behind, was replaced by a Cortosis forged blade scavenged from a forgotten dueling ring on Narration. It had no kyber crystal, no color, only weight. He learned to use it with 2 hands, then 1, then blindfolded, until the blade became an extension of will, not of tradition. And still, he did not call himself Sith. He did not kneel. He did not chant. He did not give his pain a name. He simply trained, day after day, alone. He began crafting new maneuvers, strike patterns designed to predict rather than react. Defense patterns that encouraged enemy overreach. Feints so precise they could bait Force sensitives into misreading intention. He wrote none of it down. He trusted only memory. Because he knew memory could not be stolen. Some nights he would sit in the ruins of old fortresses, watching the stars shift through broken ceilings. He never spoke aloud, never questioned what he was becoming, but he knew the transformation had already begun. He no longer measured right or wrong, only effectiveness. No longer paused for ethics, only outcomes. And the Jedi teachings he once memorized now felt like lullabies meant for children. What the Council called darkness, he now saw as detail. What they labeled corruption, he understood as clarity, the willingness to see reality without flinching. He didn't seek revenge. He didn't dream of the temple. But if the Force had brought him here, to the edge of history, to the forgotten halls of both Sith and Jedi, then perhaps the Force was not what they claimed it to be. Perhaps it, too, had been silenced. And now, it was listening again. He was no longer a Jedi, but he still remembered how they moved, how they breathed, how they hesitated before striking. He remembered it because he had erased it from himself. Every motion he once made for peace was now sharpened for purpose. Every lesson meant to protect life had been reimagined to end it swiftly, without cruelty, without waste. On one forgotten world near the edge of wild space, he was attacked by mercenaries hired by a warlord whose title no one remembered. 5 men, 5 different species, 5 different weapons. They didn't last 30 seconds. He didn't use the Force. He didn't ignite a lightsaber. He didn't need to. The fight was not a test of skill, it was proof of something else. That restraint, as the Jedi taught it, was not peace. It was permission for failure, and he would never fail again. Over time, word of him began to spread, not as a name, but as rumor. A tall figure draped in scavenged armor, carrying a blade of no light. He spoke rarely, traveled alone, and left nothing unfinished. Some believed he was Sith, others said he was Republic Black Ops. A ghost of the Mandalorian Wars, an experiment gone wrong. He didn't correct them. He didn't care, because all those lies served the same. Truth that he was no longer part of their galaxy. He was something in between. He had stopped drawing from the light, not out of rejection, but indifference. The Force was a current, and he had learned to swim both directions. He could crush stone with a thought, yet heal his wounds in silence. He could freeze his heartbeat for minutes and hear motion through walls. He could walk through battlefields without detection, not through stealth, but through absence. He had become invisible to both sides of the Force because he had stepped outside its arguments. Once, on a shattered colony moon, he discovered the remains of a Sith holocron. Its gatekeeper whispered lessons of domination and eternal power. He listened, then he destroyed it. He didn't want to rule. He wanted to understand. He realized that both the Jedi and the Sith were mirrors, each obsessed with controlling the other's reflection. Light and dark endlessly repeating. He saw it clearly now. Balance was never peace. It was tension. Endless, necessary, violent tension. The kind the galaxy feared and the kind it secretly needed. He trained until even his own fear eroded. Until hesitation became impossible. Until his heart no longer recognized guilt. He began writing doctrines in his mind. Not for an army. Not for students. For himself. He rewrote every principle the Jedi had ever carved in stone. Where they said emotion, yet peace, he said emotion without weakness. Where they said ignorance, yet knowledge, he said knowledge without restraint. And where they said there is no death, he said there is only preparation. Because death, to him, was no longer punishment, it was training. He didn't seek immortality, he sought permanence. And that could only be achieved by breaking the one law the Jedi could never face, that peace is temporary, but power endures. He no longer prayed to the Force, he commanded it. Not as servant, not as slave, but as architect. And in that moment, the Jedi within him, the last trace of what he had been, finally died. Not in anger, not in sorrow, but in clarity. The death of restraint was the birth of Desolous. The galaxy forgot him, but he never forgot the galaxy. Years passed, and his absence became legend. The Jedi spoke of him rarely, and when they did, they spoke in warnings. Whispers traded between masters. Do not let another become what he became. But even those whispers faded. Because the Jedi believed silence meant safety, they were wrong. He had not died in exile. He had evolved in it. His body carried new scars. His face, once calm, now wore stillness that felt heavier than armor. He no longer needed robes or emblems. Every breath, every movement, every thought, they had all been refined into purpose. He walked among outlaws, mercenaries, and warlords not as an equal, but as an observer. And wherever he went, the fighting stopped. Not from peace, from recognition. They could feel something in him, not power, but inevitability. He no longer lectured, no longer debated. He watched, he listened. He learned how empires died not from defeat, but from compromise. He saw how the weak gathered under banners of peace they could not defend. How leaders bartered conviction for comfort. How the Jedi's influence had spread like a tranquil poison, calming the galaxy until it forgot how to fight. He studied them all, and in every civilization he visited, he found the same flaw. They had grown dependent on the illusion of protection. He was no longer part of that illusion. On the scorched world of Maeli, he witnessed a civil uprising that wiped out an entire city in hours. The Republic arrived late, as always. The Jedi never came. He stood at the edge of the ruins and realized the truth. Peace was not the absence of war. Peace was the death of readiness. And the galaxy was dying in peace. That night, as the smoke rose into the clouds, he finally accepted what the Force had been trying to show him, that the Jedi had not betrayed him. They had betrayed themselves. their endless restraint, their obsession with virtue, their refusal to adapt. It had all become a kind of blindness, and he would cure it. He left Haley before dawn, traveled deeper into the uncharted outer rim, to systems not even smugglers mapped, to planets unrecorded, where the Force felt unrestrained, wild, unfiltered, alive. There, among ruins of wars no one remembered, he built what the galaxy had refused him: discipline without doubt, power without permission, will without limits. And when he was ready, he no longer answered to the name the Jedi had given him. He took another one born not of anger, but of revelation: Darth Desolous. He didn't take it to honor the Sith. He took it to mark a truth: that destruction could be purity, that ruin could be order, that peace could be rebuilt only by those strong enough to erase weakness. He began training others, not many, only a few: exiles, soldiers, fallen Jedi, who, like him, had seen the cracks in the Order's faith. He taught them not to hate, he taught them to prepare. And so, the quiet warrior who once served the Republic, the man who once believed in peace, became the architect of a doctrine meant to test the Jedi's soul. The galaxy had lost a Jedi, but it had gained something far more dangerous. Not a tyrant, not yet a conqueror, but the shadow of both. The day the Jedi fell silent was the day Darth Desolous began to speak. There was no ceremony, no ritual, no red blade ignited to mark the fall. He didn't kneel, didn't chant, didn't beg the Force to transform him. He simply stopped answering to the name he had been given. The man who once served the Jedi had already died. Now, he erased the body. He discarded his old robes, letting them burn in a forgotten cave beneath a nameless moon. He melted down the badge given to him at knighthood. It hissed as it vanished in flame, not with rage, but with finality. Even the face he wore began to change. The lines grew deeper, the stare colder, not from age, but from discipline. He was no longer Padawan, no longer Jedi, no longer servant to a council that had asked for warriors, then punished them for surviving. He became silence, given form. A man who did not need to fall, because he had never been lifted by their light in the first place. The Force was still with him, but now it didn't restrain him. It listened. He moved through space like a ghost, leaving no records, no signatures. The Republic's scanners didn't catch his ship. Jedi patrols reported nothing unusual, because he didn't challenge them. He simply vanished between systems, studying, observing, building. It was on the black sands of a dead world, near the Tion cluster, that the name came to him. Not in a vision, not in madness, but in clarity. The wind there never stopped screaming. The ruins stretched for miles, ancient, dry, untouched. He spent weeks alone in a collapsed stronghold, deciphering glyphs no Jedi had ever dared to preserve. Among them, he found stories of conflict without victory, wars where both sides lost. But one side remembered how to endure. That word, endure, stayed with him. Because he hadn't won, he hadn't fallen, he had endured. That was when he chose it. A name not meant to inspire. A name not chosen from vanity, legend, or prophecy. Desolous, not a title. A state of being. A warning to the galaxy of what happens when you cast away a weapon, then forget what it was made for. He didn't adopt the name to become Sith. He adopted it because it was honest. He believed in clarity, in preparation, in the simplicity of control. The Jedi called those things dangerous. The Sith called them sacred. He called them necessary. On the far edge of the mid-rim, he hollowed out an asteroid base long abandoned by smugglers. There, in silence, he built the beginning of what would come later, not an empire, not a temple, not even a movement, a threshold. A space between what he had been and what he would become. He trained in artificial gravity shifts, simulated vacuum breaches, forced dueling against programmed droids designed to mimic Jedi aggression. But it was never anger that drove him, only readiness. The Jedi fell to the dark side when they lost control. He intended to master control so completely that even darkness would obey him. He etched the name Desolous into the wall of his chamber, not in stone, in metal scorched into cortosis by the blade he'd forged from exile. It was the only name spoken there, the only name that mattered now. His past was gone. His old life buried beneath layers of obedience and doctrine that had failed the galaxy. Now, he was becoming something else, not because he hated the Jedi, but because he no longer believed they would survive what was coming. And if the future required violence, then he would teach it, not with vengeance, with precision. Because he knew what the Jedi refused to say aloud. That the Force doesn't care about peace, it only responds to will. And his will had never been clearer. He did not build a code, he dismantled one. Piece by piece, the Jedi teachings were stripped of sentiment, compassion, hope, trust. They were replaced by clarity. He kept no scriptures, no holocrons. He wrote only in action, testing every idea with movement, not meditation. And what he created was not a belief system, it was a doctrine, not fueled by hatred, not born of chaos, but forged in the space between what the Jedi denied and what the Sith exploited. He called it discipline without morality, not evil, not blind destruction, only action measured by outcome. A philosophy the Jedi would call heresy, and the Sith would call incomplete. But Desolous didn't care about their approval. He had seen what happened when warriors waited for permission, when soldiers were asked to feel before they fought, when protectors were trained to hesitate. He was done waiting. On a moon circling a dead star, he conducted his first simulations, battle scenarios drawn from Republic archives and corrupted by real intent. He analyzed Jedi defense patterns, Soresu rotations, Makashi counterforms, and then he rewrote them. He turned defensive stances into offensive traps, meditative states into ambush cues. He crafted a system where every motion punished hesitation, and he tested it on droids, dozens at a time. Not for speed, for efficiency, not how fast they died, but how little energy he needed to kill them. He wore cortosis armor, not to defy the Jedi but to understand their limitations. He studied the effects of electrostaff strikes against force shields, how to disable, how to bait, how to control. Because war wasn't about strength, it was about control. And mercy, he decided, was the greatest enemy of control. He didn't teach mercy, he taught conclusion. A fight should end the moment it begins. No speeches, no standoffs, no warnings. The Jedi said to defend the innocent. He said, eliminate the threat before innocence is lost. He wasn't forming an army, not yet, but the doctrine was being written into his body through repetition, resistance, and silence. He ran battle sequences in zero-oxygen chambers, practiced with real blades in gravity flux fields, fought blind, fought injured, fought surrounded, and in every test, he measured himself not by victory, but by waste. Every extra step, every breath he didn't need, every drop of energy spent on emotion, he erased them all. Because Desolous believed the perfect warrior is not the one who feels, It's the one who finishes. He recorded nothing, not a single rule, not a single commandment, because he wasn't trying to inspire others. He was trying to outlive them. He began constructing trial paths, artificial dueling routes built from stone and steel, each one simulating a specific Jedi tactic. Some mimicked lightsaber duelists. Others mimicked council formations used during high-level engagements. He completed each trial in silence, and when he failed, he rebuilt them harder. He wasn't angry when he bled. He bled often. He welcomed it, because pain wasn't punishment, it was feedback. The Jedi taught him to suppress pain. The Sith taught him to weaponize it. But Desolous learned to measure it as data, as signal, as edge. One night, while training under artificial stormlight, he collapsed. Not from injury, from hunger. He hadn't eaten in 3 days. He was testing the limits of focus under deprivation. He crawled to his feet, finished the routine, then recorded the outcome in his mind. Not just how he moved, but how he adapted. Because war, he knew, didn't reward the strongest. It rewarded the most ready. He didn't seek power, he sought removal of failure, and that meant removing anything or anyone that taught weakness as virtue. Even if that meant the Jedi. Even if that meant the past. Even if that meant himself. He didn't announce his return. He didn't seek confrontation. But war, like instinct, always finds those prepared for it. His first trial came without warning. A remote supply route near the Meridian sector had been taken by a mercenary syndicate. The Republic issued no formal response. The Jedi didn't respond at all. But Desolous watched, not for justice, for opportunity. The planet was cold, thin atmosphere, dust storms that drowned comm signals. He landed under cover of night, walked for 3 kilometers through ruined mining tunnels, and entered the compound without alert. 17 mercenaries, 3 sentries, no force users. He gave no warning, no demands. In under 2 minutes, it was done. No survivors, no alarms. When Republic scouts arrived days later, they found the mercs dead at their stations. Still seated, still armed, but every one of them struck at the base of the neck. No burns, no mess, only silence. The Jedi blamed internal betrayal. The Republic blamed rival cartels. Desolous didn't explain. Because this wasn't rebellion, it was rehearsal. He returned to the outer rim, analyzed every moment, angle of approach, reaction time, foot pressure. And when he rebuilt the trial in his chamber, he improved it. But this was only the beginning. On Jomark, a Jedi enclave had been secretly sheltering Republic defectors, officers disillusioned with the war machine, seeking asylum in spiritual retreat. Desolous didn't attack them. He infiltrated. He posed as a lost traveler, accepted into the enclave by a master too kind for her own safety. He observed for 2 weeks, watched their patterns, logged their drills. And then, on the 14th night, he challenged one of the instructors to a friendly duel. Wooden staffs, non-lethal, simple test of skill. It lasted 8 seconds. The instructor never landed a blow, never saw the feint, never blocked the finish. He collapsed unconscious before understanding what had happened. Desolous bowed respectfully, then left. He didn't kill them, didn't burn the enclave, because destruction was not always victory. Sometimes, fear that arrives without blood lasts longer. From that day forward, Jomark's enclave changed its policies. No outsiders, no exceptions. And Desolous moved on. Another trial, this Time on Ord Talavos, a former Sith-aligned moon abandoned during the new Sith Wars. A group of Black Market Force acolytes had begun gathering there. They weren't Sith, they weren't Jedi. They were trying to become both. Desolous entered their gathering uninvited. They demanded his name. He didn't give it. They threatened him. He didn't move. When they attacked, he didn't draw a weapon. He used their own confusion as a weapon. Their pride, their chaos. 7 Force wielders, all dead in under 90 seconds. He left their bodies untouched. Let the next arrivals find them. Another message, another calibration. He returned to his base, reconstructed every mistake, reviewed every unnecessary step. Not for ego, for elimination. These were not victories, they were diagnostics. Each trial taught him how Jedi reacted, how Force sensitives thought under pressure, how fear took root in different species, how to exploit it, and slowly, Desolous became something more than a warrior. He became a filter, a crucible that measured the galaxy's readiness for real conflict. And it was failing. The Jedi still trained as if battle were dishonor. The Republic still governed as if fear could be reasoned with. And Desolous knew soon, very soon, that would break. His trials continued, small, isolated, precise. He didn't leave signatures. He left questions. How did this garrison fall overnight? Why did this militia surrender before first contact? Who cleared this syndicate compound without surveillance traces? He didn't need recognition. He needed data. Because one day, it would not be 17 mercs, it would not be rogue acolytes. It would be Jedi. Dozens, maybe hundreds. And when that day came, Desolous would not be testing doctrine. He would be executing it. The galaxy was still asleep. Jedi patrols returned to their routes. Senators debated supply chains. Peace treaties were signed with the same hands that funded wars in secret. And above it all, the temple on Coruscant still stood its towers of light rising like spires of hope. But in the darkness between stars, Desolous was preparing for something none of them could see. Not conquest, not revenge, correction. He had completed his trials, refined his doctrine, erased every trace of hesitation from body and mind. Now he was building, not armies, not legions, but conditions. He began identifying pressure points in the Republic systems with fragile leadership, fractured loyalties, aging defenses. Worlds too far from Coruscant to be protected in time. Worlds the Jedi had forgotten. He started small. Black market shipments intercepted. Commanders bribed, then silenced. Local militias trained under false names with tactics lifted directly from Jedi archives, altered, hardened, weaponized. He wasn't forming a rebellion. He was shaping a reflection. A mirror held up to the order that had once cast him out. His followers weren't Sith. They didn't chant. They didn't kneel. They trained. Former Republic soldiers, disillusioned Force sensitives. Even outcasts from Jedi enclaves too remote for the Council to monitor. They were not bound by faith, only by purpose. Desolous taught them how to fight Jedi, how to predict their forms, how to survive their first strike, and how to end the battle before the Jedi could preach. He gave them Cortosis woven armor, electrostaffs resistant to lightsabers, tactics built on disruption and finality. He stripped away every layer of nobility, and what remained was lethal. His outposts were buried in asteroid fields, hidden in dead moons, carved into the bones of fallen warships. No insignia, no declarations, only training, only doctrine. Every simulation tested their ability to end Jedi not with rage, but with readiness. Not with numbers, but with precision. His recruits never saw his face. He spoke through shadow, taught through silence, and when they failed, they weren't corrected, they were removed, because in the war he was preparing for, failure wouldn't be punished, it would be forgotten. He didn't hate the Jedi anymore. He had moved beyond emotion. He simply understood what they could no longer admit, that peace, left unchecked, becomes decay. And he had seen enough of decay. In time, his name began to reach the outer rim, not as rumor but as myth. A force wielder who trained warriors without the code, who destroyed Jedi without touching the dark side. A figure who moved between systems like a shadow wearing armor. The Jedi heard the name, but they didn't speak it, not out of respect, out of denial, because to name him was to admit he had survived. And survival, to them, meant failure. They had hoped he would vanish, fade into the void as so many exiles did. But he hadn't vanished. He had become something worse than fallen. He had become prepared. The war hadn't started. No battles had been declared. No fleets moved. But in the heart of Desolous, the first strike had already been decided. And when it came, it wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be theatrical. It would be exact, sudden, irreversible. Because Desolous didn't believe in war as politics. He believed in war as memory etched into the galaxy by the hands of those who refused to be forgotten. And the Jedi had already forgotten too much. It didn't start with a call. There was no signal, no message, no invitation. Only a feeling, a pull in the Force, quiet, cold, deliberate. Like gravity without mass. And across the outer rim certain Jedi felt it. Not the ones in power, not the voices on the council or the masters sent to negotiate peace. The forgotten ones. Those who had been dismissed for questioning too much. Those who had walked away in silence, unable to serve a code that had already condemned them. Those who had never belonged and knew it. They felt the pull not in their minds, but in their failure. And without speaking, without knowing why, they began to drift. Some came from agricultural core. Some from outposts where war had ended but never healed. Some from cells where they had been locked for acts the Order refused to name. None of them were Sith. None of them had fallen in the way the Jedi feared. They had simply broken not from darkness, but from silence. When they arrived, Desolous said nothing. He didn't ask why they came. He didn't offer forgiveness. He didn't offer anything. He watched, and if they stayed, he trained them. Not as students, not as soldiers, as weapons. He didn't allow names, no ranks, no rituals. He erased hierarchy. Stripped away the illusion of worthiness. Removed every trace of tradition. Because what he was building needed no ego. Only execution. The first few left. Too attached, too afraid. Still clinging to robes that no longer fit. But the ones who remained did not look back. They trained in silence. Acolytes who once argued over lightsaber forms now moved without speech. Padawans once obsessed with ascension now sought only precision. They stopped asking about the Force and started mastering what it could do. No one talked about the Jedi. Desolous didn't permit it. They were not here to mourn the past. They were here to destroy what had survived it. More came. A trickle at first, then a steady rhythm like drops of water wearing down stone. A knight who had lost his Padawan in a war the council refused to acknowledge. A seer who foresaw the fall of Coruscant and was branded heretic. A healer who watched clones die under orders she was never allowed to question. They came not out of hope, but out of knowing that hope was a lie. And in Desolous, they found something purer than comfort. They found preparation. He didn't teach them how to win. He taught them how to not lose. They drilled in groups of 3, always uneven, always imbalanced, because real combat never waits for symmetry. They were denied lightsabers, taught to use electrostaffs, brutal, inelegant, unforgiving, taught to wear armor that resisted Jedi weapons, not because it protected, but because it gave them time. They learned how to fall without sound, how to strike without anger, how to kill without hesitation. Some failed. They were not punished, they were dismissed, because failure was not weakness. Failure was contamination, and Desolous was building something that could not afford infection. He didn't speak of destiny, he didn't promise glory, he gave them only the truth. The Jedi would fall, not to rage, not to darkness, but to their own disbelief that anyone trained by them could turn and strike with absolute purpose. And as that army grew, Desolous said only one thing: you are not chosen, you are made. They arrived broken, but Desolous didn't rebuild them. He didn't offer healing, didn't offer purpose. He offered structure, because purpose, he believed, was a lie built on desire, and structure was immune to lies. Their training began not with combat, but with stillness. They stood in formation for hours, eyes forward, breath measured, not allowed to speak, not allowed to move. The weak called it punishment, the strong called it foundation. Desolous observed them without comment. He memorized their patterns, who shifted first, who blinked most, who broke eye contact when he walked past. He catalogued it all. Because every failure in battle begins with something smaller, a moment of undisciplined thought, a fraction of doubt, a heartbeat too fast. He erased those moments one by one. The Jedi had trained them to listen to the Force. Desolous trained them to control it, to suppress instinct, to resist distraction, to override pain with precision. They were never permitted to act on reflex. Every strike was measured, every step accounted for, every movement executed without waste. Desolous introduced a modified combat system, an inverse of traditional lightsaber forms, adapted for close quarters, armor-resistant engagements. They trained with electrostaffs, not sabers. Staffs that hummed with iron disruptors and brutal weight. If they dropped their weapon, they weren't corrected. They were dismissed. The first to fall behind were told to leave. Some begged. Some tried to explain. Desolous didn't respond. He believed in silence as a filter, and silence removed all but the most ready. They sparred in pairs, in trios, then in uneven numbers. Fights where cooperation was not guaranteed, because loyalty could not be assumed, and in real battle, it rarely mattered. They fought in darkness, in blindfolds, under strobe light, in heat, in cold, under low oxygen, not to master hardship but to erase sensitivity to it. He ran them through real simulations, drawn from Jedi battle archives. Mock scenarios where they were ordered to breach council chambers, disable a Jedi Knight, escape detection inside a temple. Not one of them asked why, because by now, they all understood the doctrine. There would be no declarations, no crusades, only precision. He drilled them in psychological control, taught them how to ignore fear, how to absorb pain without response, how to die slowly if required so that the mission could succeed without interruption. Some of them began to dream again, not of freedom, not of vengeance, but of clarity. They felt their minds change, their breathing shift, their connection to the Force narrow into a razor's edge, not dark, not light, just silent. Desolous never gave speeches, never told them who they were. He only asked one question at the end of each week. Were you ready today? If they said yes, they were given more. If they said no, they were left behind. The doctrine was not compassion. It was not ideology. It was elimination of anything that interfered with finality. And the longer they trained, the more their old selves dissolved. Some forgot the names of their masters. Others forgot what rank they had once held. A few stopped speaking altogether, not because they were forbidden, but because they no longer needed to. They didn't become Sith, they became doctrine. And Desolous watched them with the only emotion he still allowed himself: satisfaction. They were not warriors. Not yet. Doctrine alone was not enough. It had to be proven under pressure, under failure, under pain. So Desolous built their crucible. He carved it beneath the bones of a derelict space station orbiting a dead star. The structure was old, once Sith, now forgotten. Its walls hummed with residual force echoes, twisted by centuries of rage and ruin. Perfect. He called it nothing, no name, no records. It was not a fortress, it was a forge. And inside, he prepared them for the only war that mattered. Each of them received armor not for protection, but for obedience. Cortosis weave, layered with ceramic composites, heavy, restrictive, forged to resist a lightsaber strike, once, not twice. It was not designed to preserve life. It was designed to enforce discipline. If they relied on it, they would die. If they moved correctly, they would not need it. Desolous watched their reactions the first time they wore it. How they adjusted their stance, how the weight bent their posture, how many of them breathed harder after the first 10 minutes. He said nothing. Instead, he activated the chamber. No warning, no countdown. They were ambushed from all sides: stun bolts, blunt kinetic drones, automated staff strikes. No simulation, no training mode. Real pain. The first one who fell cried out. The second tried to remove their helmet. The third struck the wall instead of the drone. Desolous deactivated the sequence after 3 minutes. 7 failed. 3 were removed. The others were ordered to repeat the trial. At double intensity. He gave them no comfort, only measurement. Pain, he told them, is not punishment. It is proof of misalignment. They began to understand. Their bodies grew slower, then faster, then silent. The armor no longer felt heavy. It felt necessary. They learned to move as one, not through orders, but through instinct. Desolous never issued commands in the field. He watched, and if someone failed, they were gone by morning. The survivors began modifying their gear, not for vanity, for precision. Stripped plates, reinforced gauntlets, sensor dampeners removed to eliminate distraction. Some carved small marks into their helmets, not to honor kills, but to remember mistakes. They were no longer students. They were sharpening stones. The pain became familiar, then irrelevant, then welcome, because pain meant they were still refining. Desolous added environmental stress, simulated vacuum, corrosive gas leaks, crushing gravity wells. They adapted. He flooded the training hall with noise, with silence, with conflicting force auras designed to disrupt concentration. They adapted. He simulated Jedi counterattacks, mimicking Form IV acrobatics, Form 3 defense loops, Form V brute power. They dissected each one, and when he finally tested them with live blades, none hesitated. Because hesitation was no longer part of who they were. They didn't speak. They didn't celebrate. They just reset the simulation. Again and again and again. They learned how to shatter bone through armor, how to disarm without drawing blood, how to kill without noise. Not out of cruelty, out of efficiency. Desolous watched them from above, arms folded, breath slow. He didn't smile, he didn't speak, but in his silence, something stirred. He had trained them not to survive the Jedi. He had trained them to end them. They were not bound by loyalty. Desolous didn't ask for it. He didn't give speeches. He didn't offer destiny. He offered only function sharpened through repetition, enforced through silence, and still they stayed. Not because they loved him, because they feared returning to a life where they had to pretend. Pretend that the Jedi had not abandoned them. Pretend that the code was truth. Pretend that peace could be preserved by denial. With Desolous, there were no lies, only the mission. And that mission had finally taken shape. The Jedi were no longer an idea to resist. They were the chosen target, not because of what they had done, but because of what they had failed to do. The Force, Desolous believed, did not choose sides. It responded to clarity, and clarity meant removing weakness before it could spread. The army was ready, not in size, not in number, but in alignment. They did not think in terms of victory. They thought in terms of removal. Each soldier was given a role. Strike, disrupt, isolate, conclude. Not a hierarchy, a sequence. They were trained to act as one body, without verbal command. If one fell, the next stepped forward. If the mission failed, the mission restarted. Desolous tested them in live engagements. They attacked pirate enclaves suspected of dealing in Jedi relics, destroyed outposts holding Republic intelligence officers, neutralized bounty hunters with connections to the temple. None of these were wars. They were exams. The galaxy still had no idea, because Desolous didn't want to be seen. He wanted to be denied, ignored, forgotten. Because when the Jedi forget you, they don't prepare for you. And that was how they would fall. His army was invisible to sensors, trained in stealth, conditioned to strike from within shadows, and then disappear. No attachments, no symbols, no legacy, only outcome. The Jedi would search for Sith. Desolous would send soldiers trained by Jedi themselves. The Council would expect red blades. He would give them metal staffs and cortosis shells. The Temple would prepare for Force storms and rage. He would give them silence and precision. Each recruit was drilled to recognize Jedi behavior under pressure, how they reacted to a threat, how they adjusted stances based on emotion, where they broke when faced with betrayal, because betrayal was always part of the plan. These were not dark side assassins, they were trained reflections. Ghosts of what the Jedi had built turned inward. Desolous did not love them, and they did not need him to. They knew their roles, they accepted their design, and if they died, they would be replaced. Because the doctrine didn't require faith, it only required repetition. Desolous spent his final days before the campaign in complete silence. No drills, no commands. He walked the halls of their training chambers, watched them run simulations without instruction, observed how they moved like echoes of a single mind. He had not created life, he had created correction. The Jedi had failed to see it. Even now, they still called him lost, still believed he would fade. But what Desolous had built could not be undone, because this army was not loyal to him. They were loyal to the one truth they had all been denied, that peace is not preserved through hope, it is preserved through readiness. And now, they were ready. The Jedi believed he had disappeared. Exile, madness, a ghost drifting beyond the outer rim. They were wrong. Desolous hadn't vanished. He had waited. And when the time came to strike, he didn't target senators or generals. He struck where it hurt. An enclave, hidden, quiet. Ellison Prime, a temple not meant for war. It was a sanctuary. A place for reflection, teaching, and healing. 24 Jedi lived there, 5 masters, 15 knights, 4 Padawans. They had no army, no warning, just silence. The temple went dark in less than 4 hours. By the time Republic scouts arrived, there was nothing left to find. No bodies, no smoke, just stone, scorched and collapsed. The central chamber had been cored out from beneath. Precision demolitions. Every entry sealed before the first explosion. Not a single alarm was triggered. No distress call sent. But the archives were gone. Erased, not stolen. Desolous hadn't come to take. He had come to remove. And he did. The council gathered in private. They debated quietly, too afraid to speak the truth. One of their own had returned not as a fallen knight, as a tactician. Someone who knew how they'd respond. Someone who had studied them from within. They didn't speak his name. Not yet. Because to say it aloud would mean they had failed to see him forming. It wasn't war. Not yet. So they called it sabotage. Pirates. Remnants of Sith cults. But deep down, the senior masters knew. Ellison wasn't chosen for power. It was chosen because it was easy. Desolous had sent a message, a test, and they had failed it. 1 week later, a second outpost went silent. This time on Delos IV. No explosions, no sign of struggle. Just empty robes left folded on the floor. Training sabers stacked neatly in a circle. Every Jedi inside had vanished. No signs of entry, no surveillance footage. Only a sealed archive door cut open not by blade, but by precision charge. Desolous hadn't come for combat. He had come for correction. And the Jedi weren't ready. Some council members urged preparation, mobilization, investigation. But others, the older ones, still clung to a different fear, that if they acted too quickly, they would admit one of their own had become more than a threat. They would admit he had become right. So they waited, and Desolous moved again. Over the next month, 5 more Jedi facilities fell. Not with flames, not with invasions, with disappearances. Entire battalions of Jedi-trained defenders, gone. Each site had something in common. Not wealth, not secrets, patterns, structures, archives, training corridors. Desolous wasn't just removing people. He was deleting knowledge, knowledge he had once memorized, knowledge he knew could be used to stop him. He didn't destroy Jedi history. He redacted it. Because in his doctrine, memory was vulnerability. The Jedi still searched for a fleet, still assumed he had allies in the shadows, Sith, mercenaries, crime lords. But there was no alliance. Only him, and the soldiers he had trained to leave nothing behind. Every strike was timed for maximum delay. Every path of attack designed to exploit Jedi patrol blind spots. Desolous didn't want to cripple the Jedi militarily. He wanted to fracture their confidence, and he had succeeded. By the time they spoke his name aloud, not in whispers, but in open chambers, it was too late. The first temple had already burned, not with fire, with precision, and they had watched it happen. There was no declaration, no fleet in orbit, no message broadcast to the galaxy. But the war had begun. Not on maps, not in the Senate, not even in the archives. It began in the silence between missions, in the sudden absences, the empty halls of outposts that had once pulsed with training and light. One by one, Jedi enclaves stopped responding. Not destroyed, not conquered, just gone. Lights dimmed, doors left open, chambers cleared with surgical precision. In some cases, lightsabers were still on the floor, still active, as if their wielders had been taken mid-breath. The Council refused to call it war. They labeled it strategic interference, blamed pirates, rogue force sects, instability on the rim. But they knew this was Desolous. The Jedi called him a fallen knight, a mistake, a lesson not properly archived. But he wasn't seeking attention. He was proving a point. That war didn't need to shout. It only needed to continue. Every few days, another site fell. A temple, a forward base, a Jedi relief vessel, en route to a medical crisis found adrift, its engines offline, crew missing. No sign of struggle, no battle, just absence. Desolous wasn't hunting them with rage. He was using their own structure, their patrol schedules, their archive logs, their defensive doctrines against them. Because he had once lived among them, he knew which masters delayed action, which sectors were underprotected, which enclaves were built for peace, not resistance. The Jedi couldn't fight what they wouldn't acknowledge. They sent investigators, then shadows, then small response teams. None returned. They tried silence, tried denial, tried waiting for it to stop. But Desolous wasn't building momentum. He didn't need it. He was removing foundation. And the Jedi felt it not in wounds, but in doubt. A knight stationed in the Outer Rim asked to be reassigned. A Padawan refused to go on solo mission. Fear, once distant, now lived in the hallways. And still, Desolous said nothing. He didn't speak through holocrons, didn't gloat through prisoners. He left only evidence that something had been there, and it had been better trained than them. The Jedi began issuing internal alerts, silent protocols not meant for public ears. But those alerts came too late. Desolous had already breached Holoniti nodes. Read the warnings before they were received. He was always ahead, because the Jedi still thought like peacekeepers. He thought like removal. He avoided strongholds. He hit the quiet ones. The temples built in mountains, forests, orbiting moons designed for meditation, not defense. And with every strike, he left fewer clues. One mission log described a team of knights arriving to a facility with meals still steaming. Whatever happened had happened fast. Too fast. A few survivors began to emerge, not many, just fragments. A half-conscious guardian found in a collapsed hangar. A knight who had locked herself in a vault, too afraid to leave even days after the attack. They described nothing. Only shadows. Only silence. Only precision. Some said it wasn't just Desolous, that there were others like him. Jedi trained, emotionless, unseen. The Council refused to confirm it, because if they admitted that Jedi had joined him, then this wasn't a rogue knight. It was an inversion. Desolous didn't call it war, because war implies opposition. He saw none. He called it correction. And by the time the Jedi understood what he meant, they had already lost more than they could afford to count. The Jedi believed they were responding, but Desolous was still leading. Every time they mobilized, he had already moved on. Every planet they fortified, he left untouched. Every ambush they planned, he had already calculated, because he wasn't fighting a war. He was teaching one. The first Jedi counterstrike came on the world of Ossa, a small desert moon, long abandoned by the Republic. The Council sent 8 knights, 3 from Coruscant, 5 from Dantooine. They were told to recover stolen archives rumored to have fallen into Sith hands. It was a trap, but not the kind they expected. When they arrived, the archives were real and empty. Every holocron, every data card, blank. A faint signal led them to a canyon complex. Dozens of electrostaffs, embedded in the sand. Cortosis weapons, the kind Desolous had trained his soldiers to use. At first, they believed it was a graveyard. Then the ground moved. Dozens of armored figures rose from beneath the dunes, silent, coordinated, prepared. The Jedi ignited their sabers. The air filled with light. But this time, light wasn't enough. The soldiers didn't fight like Sith. They didn't charge. They advanced with surgical precision strikes, aimed not to kill immediately, but to dismantle stance, rhythm, focus. 2 Jedi fell in seconds. Their blades shorted by cortosis. The rest tried to retreat uphill. They never made it. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When Republic observers arrived 3 days later, they found the canyon filled with the sound of wind and nothing else. Only one survivor was recovered, a knight named Errol Carr. He spoke just once before dying from shock. They moved like Jedi, but without hesitation. The council held his body in stasis for analysis. The results were worse than anyone expected. He had been killed by clean precision strikes, not random slashes, no excess motion, no emotional variance in the Force signature. Whoever led the attack had mastery beyond logic, beyond rage, beyond what the Order trained for. Desolous had not just built soldiers, he had built reflections. The council convened in secret. They debated countermeasures, tactics, new protocols. But each meeting ended the same way, with denial. Because to admit that Desolous had created something superior was to admit that the Jedi could be replicated, and that replication could be improved. Still, they sent responses, teams to trace his movements, masters to intercept communication paths, archivists to unseal restricted files on his past. Every lead led nowhere. Because Desolous wasn't hiding, he was erasing. Whole planetary records disappeared. Ship registries wiped clean. Trade logs rewritten to make his fleets look like ghost traffic. Even the Jedi who tracked him through the Force found only static, as if his presence had been replaced with purpose, no emotion, no anger, only intention. And when he did leave signs, they weren't threats, they were lessons. On a remote listening post near the mid-rim, investigators found a corridor of blood drawn across the walls, a pattern of lines and circles repeating endlessly. It wasn't a message, it was a map. Each line connected coordinates to the next fallen enclave. When decoded, it formed one word in ancient script: prepared. The council didn't speak of it publicly. They buried the record in sealed archives. But among the younger Jedi, the rumor spread anyway. That Desolous was not killing for dominance. He was killing to prove they had grown complacent. That his army wasn't fueled by hate. It was fueled by memory, the memory of every order ignored, every warning silenced, every warrior restrained until death. And across the galaxy, Jedi began to whisper the truth. That maybe the war wasn't a punishment, maybe it was their fault, because the blood on those walls wasn't meant to horrify them. It was meant to wake them. The Jedi always believed they understood loss, but they had never understood failure, not like this. By the time the council gathered to confront Desolous directly, nearly 200 Jedi were gone, entire enclaves erased, training lines severed, records destroyed, names erased from memory, and still they called it coincidence. They spoke in circles, analyzed probabilities, convinced themselves that the pattern could not be deliberate. Because if it was, then Desolous hadn't fallen, he had surpassed them. And that truth was more dangerous than any war. He had struck without vengeance, without corruption, without chaos. The one thing the Jedi could never understand. He was calm. Their spies traced him to Malrev IV, a volcanic world long abandoned after the Great Sith Wars. It was there that his army had gathered in silence, training, waiting, perfecting. The Republic refused to intervene. Too far, too costly, too uncertain. So the Jedi went alone. 1,000 knights, a force large enough to overwhelm any single warlord in the Outer Rim. But Desolous wasn't any warlord. He had predicted the response, planned for it years earlier. The terrain, the choke points, the psychology, every Jedi deployment mirrored the same strategy he had designed when he was one of them. And that was his final lesson. The Jedi had not come to destroy him. They had come to test themselves, and they didn't even realize it. When their ships descended through the clouds, the surface looked empty. No armies, no structures, no opposition, only silence. They spread out, deployed scouts, formed defensive circles, then the ground shifted. From beneath the ash and stone, the army of Desolous emerged armored, coordinated, ready. They didn't roar, didn't shout, didn't ignite lightsabers. They advanced. The first wave of Jedi fell before they understood what was happening. The Cortosis armor absorbed their strikes. The Electrostaffs countered their every move. Every Jedi form had a weakness, and Desolous had written the manual on how to exploit them. The Masters tried to rally the front, tried to form phalanxes and defense rings. But the battlefield was already decided. The Jedi fought for hours, some in pairs, some alone, each surrounded by the reflection of their own training. Their own precision turned against them. By sunset, the field was quiet again. Only one army remained standing. Desolous had lost soldiers too, but not many. And those who fell had done so exactly as trained, without fear, without speech, without distraction. When it was over, he didn't celebrate, didn't command, didn't gloat. He stood among the ruins of robes and sabers and said nothing. Because victory wasn't what he wanted. It was proof that the Jedi's strength had become illusion. That peace had made them predictable. That mercy had become disease. His army buried their dead in silence. The Jedi never returned for theirs. The Council called it a tragedy. The Republic called it a loss. Desolous called it correction. But deep within that victory, something shifted. For the first time, he felt what he had tried so hard to erase: emptiness. He had won, but there was nothing left to oppose him. No purpose beyond the war he had created. He realized too late that even the Jedi's weakness had given him meaning. And now that weakness was gone. In the weeks that followed, his army began to fracture. Some left, some vanished. Some turned on each other. Discipline without belief can't survive forever. Desolous didn't chase them. He stayed on Malrev IV, among the ruins of the battle, walking the same ground each night. The war had ended, but it hadn't proven peace. It had proven only this, that when you build your life around a lie, it doesn't die when you expose it. It dies when you no longer need it. And the Jedi no longer needed him to remind them, because now they feared what he had become. Not a Sith, not a monster, just a man who had believed them once and learned what it cost. The Jedi came in force, not in whispers, not in patience. They came as a wall of light, 1,000 knights, flanked by guardians, guided by masters. They called it a final strike, a necessary end. not because they were certain of victory, but because they needed this to be over. Desolous was not a mystery anymore. He was a scar they could no longer ignore. And now, on Malrev IV, they intended to cut him from history. They landed in waves, fleets descending through layers of black ash and sulphurous wind. The sky was thick with volcanic smoke. The air trembled with tectonic breath. But Desolous was already waiting. He had chosen this world, not for strategy, for memory. Malrev IV had once belonged to the Sith. It had once burned with their rituals, cracked with their betrayal. Now it would burn with something else. Clarity. His soldiers moved underground. Hidden chambers, tunnels laced with thermal sensors and motion-based alarms. No turrets, no traps, only readiness. He didn't meet the Jedi in orbit, didn't send an emissary, didn't prepare an ambush, because he wanted them to come. He wanted them confident, centered, organized, because structure, once exposed, collapses faster than chaos. The Jedi assembled on the plains wide, sharp, volcanic ground carved by time and pressure. Their formations were elegant, lines of symmetry, commanders at every post. Masters took position on the high ridges, watchful, measured. They had studied Desolous, reconstructed his attacks, predicted his patterns. They believed they were ready. But readiness, as Desolous once taught, is not the same as understanding. He stood alone at first. No army, no mask, just armor blackened, reforged, cracked by years of silent doctrine. He walked onto the plains with no blade drawn, no gesture of challenge. And still, the Jedi paused, because they could feel it, in the Force, in the dust, in their bones. Something was wrong, not because he radiated darkness, but because he didn't. There was no turbulence in him, no grief, no malice, only direction. The Jedi called forward their lead envoy, a council master whose name will never be remembered. He asked Desolous to surrender, offered mercy, offered redemption. Desolous said nothing, not out of pride, but because the question was meaningless. He turned his back and walked away. And that's when the ground opened. Not from bombs, not from force tremors, from discipline. His army emerged in silence, not charging, not screaming, marching. 100, then 2, then 400. Armored figures, no lightsabers, no banners, only metal and movement. The Jedi panicked, not because they feared death, but because they did not understand what they were seeing. These weren't Sith. These weren't mercenaries. These were them trained differently. Trained better. Desolous didn't give an order. His army didn't wait for one. The siege began with no opening shot, no declaration. Only one simple fact. The Jedi were already too late. When the Jedi advanced, the air split with light. Hundreds of sabers ignited at once, painting the ash in shifting colors. Blue, green, amber. They believed the light would drive away fear. But on Malrev IV, it only revealed how far they had fallen. Desolous stood at the front, unmoving. His army waited in formation, a sea of Cortosis armor, faces hidden, weapons steady. No one spoke. No one trembled. And then, with no sound, they moved. The first clash didn't echo. The atmosphere absorbed it. Light met metal, and the sabers faltered brief flickers as the Cortosis discharged. Dozens of Jedi found their weapons dying in their hands. They reacted as they had been trained to react, with grace, with focus, with restraint. But restraint was death here. Desolous's soldiers pressed forward, step by step, overwhelming defense with rhythm. Not aggression, not fury, just timing. Every strike had purpose. Every motion consumed as little energy as possible. The Jedi tried to regroup, their masters shouting commands across the plains. But the sound was drowned by the storm, the low, endless groan of the planet itself. It was as if the world wanted this to happen. Desolous didn't lead from the center. He moved along the flank, silent, watching, adjusting. Where a formation broke, he reinforced. Where a line wavered, he shifted its direction with a gesture. He didn't need to speak. His army already knew the doctrine. Discipline without hesitation, execution without emotion. To the Jedi, it felt like fighting mirrors. They recognized the moves, they recognized the principles. But the difference was precision. Jedi fought to protect. Desolous fought to conclude. Within minutes, dozens were down. Cortosis staffs cracked ribs, shattered knees, disarmed masters. No mercy, no pause. The council had underestimated him. They believed his strength was ideology, a corrupted philosophy they could reason with. But Desolous didn't care about philosophy. He cared about proof. And Malrev IV was his proof. The heat rose as the battle spread. Ash turned to glass beneath their feet. Lightning flashed across the volcanic ridges, striking the shields of descending transports. The sky itself looked alive, red veins tearing across the clouds. The Jedi tried aerial maneuvers, leaping high with the Force, attempting to collapse Desolous's ranks from above. He had prepared for that. Electro pulses surged upward, disrupting balance midair. Falling knights struck the ground before they could recover. Their sabers sputtered out, their focus shattered. Desolous advanced through the chaos, armor glowing orange from heat, visor dim against the storms of energy. He never hurried, never shouted. He simply moved toward the next target, calm, deliberate, unstoppable. A master confronted him near the calm ridge, old, steady, one of the last who remembered Desolous as a Padawan. He said Desolous's name, tried to reach what remained of the man inside the armor. Desolous stopped, looked at him for a long time, then spoke for the first time that day. "You taught me to wait." And with a single strike, the master fell. It wasn't cruelty, it wasn't hatred. It was fulfillment, the final lesson of patience, reversed. The battle raged for hours, though time lost meaning. The world cracked. Steam hissed through the fissures. Bodies vanished into molten pits. But through it all, the army of Desolous never broke formation. Their training held. Their rhythm never faltered. And for the first time in centuries, the Jedi faced an enemy who fought without weakness because he had learned it from them. By sunset, the field had changed color. The ash was no longer black. It was gray, streaked with glass and silence. The Jedi still stood, but fewer now, fewer than they could count. And Desolous, he hadn't even begun to lose. The battle didn't end. It dissolved. Like the air itself had forgotten to breathe. The Jedi were scattered across the plains, fragments of light struggling to stay alive in a storm of shadow and fire. Every move they made felt slower, every thought heavier. The Force itself seemed muted, as if the planet refused to carry their hope any longer. Desolous moved through the chaos like a memory. His armor was scarred, his breath steady. Every step he took carved new silence into the noise. He no longer saw Jedi. He saw shapes, patterns, predictable sequences of motion. Each one learned from the same code he had abandoned. He cut through them with mathematical precision, a doctrine given life through muscle and repetition. The same lessons they had used to teach him control were now dismantling them one by one. He wasn't faster. He wasn't stronger. He was simpler, and simplicity was fatal. The Jedi fought bravely. They adapted, improvising mid-battle, pairing off to counter the formations of his soldiers. But Desolous had designed for that, too. Every group of warriors acted as extensions of one another, offsetting rhythm, forcing imbalance. The Jedi's coordination fractured, their ranks twisted under their own unity. And in the fractures, Desolous moved. One by one, he turned their defensive patterns against them. Each parry redirected energy back into their own stances. Each dodge drew them closer to their allies, too close. He had turned cooperation into a weapon. Soon, the ash covered everything. Vision failed, sound blurred. The only constant was movement, slow, inevitable, merciless. A young knight tried to reach him. She leapt through the storm, blade raised high, eyes filled with conviction. Her saber struck his armor and shorted instantly. He caught her wrist, twisted once, and let her fall without looking back. He didn't hate her. He didn't even remember her face. Because hatred required recognition, and Desolous had stopped recognizing anything human. To him, this was not slaughter, it was confirmation. The Jedi had become ornamental, a ceremony of peace, pretending to be strength, and he had come to end the illusion. His soldiers pressed forward, coordinated without sound. The Jedi's remaining masters tried to rally them, forming circular defenses, repelling advances through combined force waves. For a brief moment, it worked. Hundreds of warriors were thrown back, scattered by the sheer pressure of unity. Desolous stood firm. His boots sank into the molten crust. Steam curled around his visor. He didn't fall. He waited for the wave to pass. When it did, he raised a single hand, not to strike, to signal. His soldiers rose from where they had fallen, without hesitation, without question, without pause, because they didn't need courage. They had purpose. The second wave shattered the Jedi circle, completely. From above, the battlefield looked like glass cracking, veins of light breaking beneath black stone. The glow of sabers flickered and died, one by one, until the field was left in dim orange reflection. There was no screaming, only the sound of impact, armor, breath, ash. Desolous didn't lead the final push. He stood at the center, surrounded by fire, watching what he had created unfold. His doctrine no longer needed him. It had become self-sustaining discipline, moving through chaos, order replacing mercy, silence replacing faith. This was what he had wanted. But as he watched, he felt something shift, a pause between strikes, a breath between collapses. For the first time, he felt the cost. The air trembled with the force, fractured and uncertain. The death of so many Jedi had begun to unbalance it, rippling across the planet in unseen waves. Even victory, it seemed, came with consequence. He closed his eyes, and in that moment, surrounded by everything he had built, Desolous finally understood. He hadn't destroyed the Jedi. He had destroyed what he once believed about himself. The ash settled, not because the battle was over, but because nothing remained to disturb it. The Jedi were gone. Some had fled in retreat. Others had fallen where they stood. Most had simply vanished into the black wind, their robes lost among the glass and smoke. Desolous stood alone at the center of it all. His armor radiated heat, his visor cracked. One gauntlet was dented, the other covered in dried blood. But his hands did not shake. He looked around, not with triumph, but with the cold calm of someone who had reached the end of a long equation. He had proven his point. He had been right. The Jedi were not ready for war, and because of that, they had tried to silence those who were. That was their mistake. But in that silence, Desolous now found something else. Stillness. Not peace, not satisfaction, just stillness. His soldiers stood, At the edges of the field, motionless, some bore wounds, some leaned against the dead, but none of them spoke. They, too, had felt at the turning point where discipline ended and something hollow began. Victory should have felt like clarity, but Desolous no longer believed in clarity. He walked across the battlefield in silence, past broken sabers, past severed limbs, past the lights that once tried to stop him. He stopped before the body of a master, one of the last, who had stood defiant until the very end. She had not begged. She had not doubted. She had simply fought with the kind of strength Desolous once respected. He looked at her face. He remembered her voice in the council chambers. "You teach fear, not discipline." He had hated her for that, built his doctrine in opposition to her words. But now, she looked at peace, more than he ever had. Desolous knelt, not to mourn, not to pray, but to listen. And what he heard was nothing. No echo in the Force. No guilt. No purpose. Only the faint wind brushing against stone, as if the planet itself had already forgotten him. He stood, and for the first time since the siege began, he wondered if he had made a mistake. Not in method, not in strategy, but in meaning. He had not come to conquer. He had come to correct. He had believed that pain could teach what the Jedi refused to see. But the truth was simpler than that. They had not feared him because he was wrong. They had feared him because he reminded them of what they used to be. And now, with their voices gone, so was the memory. Desolous looked up at the dark sky. No stars, no fleet, no sign of another wave. This was the end of his movement. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well. The galaxy would remember his name. The Order would never forget the price they paid. But memory was not justice. And Desolous had never wanted to be remembered. He turned away from the ridge, from the battlefield, from the soldiers who had given everything to his cause. And he walked into the volcanic storm without a word. Because even in victory, he was still alone. The sky above Malrev IV had not changed, still red, still filled with ash, still echoing with the screams of war long buried in its molten rock. But this time, the Jedi did not come to lecture. They came to end something they could no longer contain. Desolous had given them no choice. He forced their hand, as he always wanted. To him, the galaxy was not changed by wisdom or patience, only by pressure. They had studied his tactics, prepared for his ambushes. And for the first time in many years, the Jedi came not to contain him, but to crush him. Thousands landed on Malrev IV, armored, coordinated, backed by temple-approved war councils, emergency orders, and grim-faced masters who had once sworn never to kill unless forced. Now they volunteered. Desolous was waiting. He didn't hide. He didn't flee. He stood at the center of his fortress like a monument carved from obsidian, unmoved by time, death, or defeat. He knew they would come. He had sent whispers into space, destroyed scouting outposts, executed envoys, every act designed to make them angry and afraid. It worked. The Jedi war fleet descended like a wave of righteous flame, but their flame met stone. Cortosis-lined defenses, barricades welded into the bones of fallen Republic walkers, and inside the last loyal warriors of Desolous, waiting with the same patience their master once trained them in. No one flinched, no one begged. This wasn't a war for power, it was a war for finality. The Jedi breached the outer defenses within hours. The air turned electric, every breath burned the lungs. But the deeper they pushed, the more resistance they faced, not in number, but in conviction. Desolous had spent years forging a philosophy, not just a force, and that belief did not vanish when surrounded. It calcified. His disciples fought in silence. Not a word, not a scream. They moved in fluid unison, like echoes of their master. And every blow was thrown with finality, not to survive, but to be remembered. The Jedi, for all their strength, were not immune to the darkness they stepped into. Desolous's influence was not limited to tactics. It bled into the Force itself, twisting the battlefield into something that felt wrong. Visions returned, doubts whispered. Some knights staggered mid-duel, clutching temples, eyes wide with memories not their own. Memories of exile, of punishment, of abandonment. The same pain Desolous once endured, now theirs. But they pressed on. They had no choice. The Council had declared him an extinction-level threat, a remnant of war that refused to fade. This mission was not a confrontation. It was a cleansing. The Jedi began collapsing tunnels with detonators, using unorthodox weapons, even issuing silent kill orders when prisoners became too many. Not because they wanted to, because they had to. It was working. Desolous watched from above, through the reinforced transperistyle of his war chamber. He saw the corridors narrowing, the defenses failing, the ground itself cracking under seismic bombardments. Still, he did not move. He waited for the Jedi to reach him. He wanted to see them, to feel them, to know if they had truly become what he always believed they were: soldiers, not saints. He activated the final lock on the chamber doors. The only way in was through him. He removed his helmet, set it beside him like a relic, and walked to the center of the obsidian floor. There he sat. He did not meditate. He did not prepare. He simply remembered every dismissal, every warning. Every time they called him dangerous, not because he was cruel, but because he was capable. He wasn't born Sith. They made him this, and now they were coming to kill what they had created. Outside, the final units broke through. Explosions lit the blackened hallways. Dust rained from above. But Desolous did not rise. He had nothing left to prove, no world to conquer, no future to protect. The Jedi were coming to kill a monster, and he was going to show them. It was their reflection. The Jedi poured into the lower halls like water seeking the cracks in a dam. But what they met was not a crumbling structure. It was a crucible. Desolous had made sure of that. He didn't design his fortress to protect himself. He designed it to test them. Every corridor was a lesson in pressure. Narrow angles, sudden drops, reflective surfaces that bent light and confused the eye. He had walked every meter of it before the invasion, traced every weakness, and sealed it with blood. The Jedi advanced carefully at first, then urgently, then desperately. Because what should have been a final sweep turned into a maze of coordinated resistance. His disciples didn't fight like broken soldiers. They moved like shadows from the past. Each carried memories of exile. Each fought like they had no home to return to. There were no screams, no calls for retreat. Only the steady rhythm of cortosis clashing with lightsabers again and again until it became a kind of music. It wasn't until the Jedi reached the central causeway that they realized the resistance wasn't random. It was staged, staggered, calculated. Desolous wasn't protecting the strong. He was burning the weak. Every retreat his army made wasn't surrender. It was filtration. He let the desperate fall, let the hesitant die. What remained were only the ones willing to become like him. The final battalion was no longer made of lost Jedi. It was something else, ritualized, disciplined, silent. They fought to delay, not to win. They knew the end had come, but they weren't trying to stop it. They were trying to scar it. Some Jedi tried to speak to them, to plead, to reason. But there was no voice left behind those visors, no memory of who they once were. Only Desolous. It was like fighting mirrors. Every Jedi cut down saw a reflection of their own fallibility. The Order hadn't just exiled these warriors, they had erased them. Now, they had returned as the erased. Still, the Jedi pushed forward. The losses mounted, but so did the resolve, because underneath the fear, there was shame. Shame that they had waited too long, that they had let Desolous grow into something only war could end. By mid-cycle, the last inner ring had collapsed. The defenders retreated into the Citadel's heart, the sanctum where Desolous waited. But the Jedi didn't celebrate. They hesitated. Every instinct told them this was a trap, but the Force remained quiet, too quiet. They pressed forward slowly, deliberately, led now not by generals, but by masters who had once taught peace. Now armored, now stained with soot and blood, the final chamber loomed ahead, dark, still, and as they stepped through, it became clear. They had won the battle, but not the war. The last defenders were already dead, their bodies aligned in formation, kneeling around the center, their visors cracked, weapons laid down, not by force, by choice. They had fulfilled their purpose to slow, to stain, to make the Jedi question everything they believed about righteousness. It worked. Some knights fell to their knees, not from injury, from recognition. They had not destroyed monsters, they had destroyed reflections. Desolous was still inside, alive, waiting. But what died before the door opened was certainty. The Jedi no longer saw themselves as saviors, just survivors, trying to fix something they let rot. Desolous had planned for this too. He never needed to win. He needed them to change. He needed them to feel what he had felt being betrayed not by enemies, but by silence. Being called dangerous for wanting to protect the weak with strength. Being told to sit still while the galaxy burned. And now, here they were, burning with him. The chamber doors slid open. Inside stood Desolous, alone, weaponless, but more powerful in presence than ever. He didn't speak, he didn't bow. He only stared at the Jedi, as if waiting for them to understand what they had become. And many did. They didn't need a speech, they didn't need prophecy, because the battlefield wasn't about fate anymore. It was about choice. The Jedi had chosen war, just like him. And whether they won or not, Desolous had already achieved his greatest victory. He made the Jedi become him, to destroy him. The air in the chamber was heavy, not with heat or smoke or sound, with awareness. Every Jedi who entered could feel it, the gravity of what waited for them. Desolous stood in the center, motionless, like a shadow cut from the same stone as the walls around him. He didn't raise a weapon, didn't ignite a blade. He just watched them. And in that silence, the Jedi saw something they didn't expect. Not hatred, not rage, but calm. One of the masters stepped forward, hand outstretched. He said the same words he had spoken years ago at Desolous's exile. "You can still stop this." Desolous almost smiled. The words hadn't changed, but the galaxy had. "I did stop it," he said. "Look at yourselves." For a moment, no one moved, because he was right. They were armored, weary, weapons raised, faces hidden beneath the ash of war. They had become soldiers, not guardians. Exactly what they swore they would never be. The first strike didn't come from Desolous. It came from fear, a young knight, trembling, convinced that hesitation would mean death. He lunged. His saber met the edge of Desolous's staff, and the energy flared violently. The others followed. Reflex, not reason, and the chamber became chaos once again. Desolous moved with precision. No wasted motion. Every parry flowed into another. Every counter ended in silence. He wasn't fighting to win anymore. He was fighting to show them how far they had fallen. The masters tried to contain him. They circled, pushing through the debris of shattered armor and fractured marble. Desolous met them head-on, his strikes echoing like thunder. He was bleeding now, his armor cracked from the earlier bombardments. But he didn't stop. A saber sliced across his chest, a deep burn that should have ended him. He stumbled, and yet he laughed. Not loud, not mocking, just enough for the sound to reach their ears and linger. "Now you understand," he whispered. Another blow struck his leg. He fell to one knee. The Jedi closed in. But even then, he didn't surrender. He caught one of their blades with his bare gauntlet, cortosis sparking, and forced it aside long enough to drive his staff into the floor. The chamber cracked. A shockwave of energy rippled outward, knocking several Jedi back. The force pulsed violently, not dark, not light. Something in between, something raw, unfiltered. He rose one final time, his body trembling, the armor breaking apart in chunks, his voice rough but steady. "You call me Sith, you call me fallen, but what are you now?" A master shouted for him to yield. Desolous shook his head. Yield? To what? He lunged again, strength born from conviction, not survival. For a few seconds, he became unstoppable, a living memory of every war the Jedi had tried to forget. And then it ended. A saber pierced his side. Then another, and another. Desolous froze mid-motion, staff still raised, eyes wide not in fear, but in understanding. He looked at the Jedi who struck the final blow. A young woman, barely older than he had been when the Council exiled him. Her hands were shaking, her eyes full of sorrow. He leaned forward, whispering the last words she would ever hear from him. "Don't let them make you forget." Then he fell. The sound of his body hitting the floor was almost gentle. The battle was over, but there was no celebration, no relief. The Jedi stood in silence, blades dimming one by one. Around them lay the last remnants of his army, those who had died believing they were free. There was no honor left to claim, only the weight of what they had done. The masters called for the retreat. Medics moved in. But even as they tended to the wounded, the feeling in the chamber didn't lift, because the victory had no purity. They hadn't restored peace, they had enforced it, and in doing so, they realized something Desolous had always known. Sometimes, peace demands cruelty. The battlefield was quiet again. Not the peace of victory, the silence of exhaustion. Ash still fell from the sky, drifting through the shattered roof of the citadel. The fires dimmed, their glow reflecting across broken armor and scorched stone. The Jedi stood among the ruins, alive, but changed. Desolous's body lay at the center. His armor fractured, his skin pale from heat and loss. Steam rose from the wound that had ended him. His eyes were half open, still reflecting the light of their sabers. And for a moment, none of them could move, because he didn't look defeated. He looked complete. One master approached, kneeling beside him. She placed a hand on his chest, searching for life. There was none. But there was something else, a pulse in the force that refused to fade. Desolous was gone, yet not gone. His presence lingered like a memory that would not let go. The Masters ordered the citadel sealed. The wounded were carried out. The dead were counted. But the number didn't matter anymore. The cost could not be measured in bodies, only in belief. As they prepared to leave, one knight asked the question no one wanted to hear. What if he was right? The council ignored it. They spoke instead of duty, of balance, of lessons to be learned. But deep down, every Jedi in that chamber already knew they had crossed a line that could not be undone. Outside, the wind carried the sound of the dying fortress creaks, cracks, and distant groans as its foundations began to collapse into the molten plains below. The last disciples of Desolous had vanished into the storm. Some killed, some surrendered, some simply walked into the fire. The Jedi didn't follow. They didn't have the strength to. When the transports rose from the surface, Malrev IV burned behind them, a crimson wound against the void. The Order called it justice. The Republic called it security. But history would call it something else. Necessity. On Coruscant, the council gathered in mourning. They spoke the words expected of them. Balance has been restored. The threat has been ended. But in their silence, there was doubt. Because every council member could feel it, a residue in the Force, sharp and cold, like a scar that refused to heal. Desolous had died, but his idea had survived. For generations after, the archives would erase his teachings. They would bury his name in restricted records, labeled only as the Pau'an warlord. But whispers persisted, among knights, among Padawans, among those who had begun to question why peace demanded so much death. Some called him mad, some called him visionary, but all agreed he had forced the Jedi to look at themselves. And that was something they would never forgive. In the centuries that followed, the memory of Desolous became a cautionary tale, a warning, a reminder of what happens when a Jedi becomes too obsessed with war. But the warning missed the truth. Desolous had not loved war. He had feared what peace had become. He had seen complacency. He had seen stagnation. He had seen an order that preached control but punished strength. And when he fell, the Force didn't resist him. It watched. It learned. Because the Force does not take sides. It reflects them. Even in death, Desolous remained part of that reflection, the shadow cast by every oath the Jedi swore. His name faded. His fortress sank beneath volcanic stone. But his story remained in the current of the Force, faint but enduring. Sometimes, a young Padawan in meditation would feel it, a whisper, a pulse, a thought that wasn't theirs. Not temptation, not darkness, just defiance. The archives would say it was imagination. The Masters would say it was noise. But the Force would remember, because Desolous had never sought immortality. He had sought consequence. And that, he achieved. He died alone on a forgotten world. But in doing so, he forced the galaxy to admit a truth it could never unsee, that light cannot exist without arrogance. And that peace, left unchallenged, becomes its own form of tyranny. The Jedi burned his body. They left no monument, no record of where he fell. But as the flames consumed what was left, one master whispered quietly into the wind. He was right about one thing. No one asked what it was, because they already knew. Desolous was dead, but the Force did not calm. His body had been reduced to ash, his armor broken and buried beneath the black glass plains of Malrev IV. His army scattered, his name, once forbidden even in whispers, began to fade from the minds of those who feared what he represented. And yet, the galaxy did not feel lighter. In the hours after the battle, the Jedi said nothing, not out of triumph or relief, but out of something colder, something heavier, a silence not born of peace, but shame. The Order did not hold a vigil. They did not record his fall as a warning. They buried the truth, not just his death, but the cost of it, because in their hearts, they knew what it had taken to defeat him. Desolous had forced the Jedi to abandon their mercy. He had drawn them into a war they refused to name. And when it ended, with 1,000 lightsabers dimmed, the Force did not sing. It wept. Some knights returned to the temple and took new Padawans. Others retired from battle altogether. But a few could not look at themselves the same way again, because they had looked into Desolous's eyes in his final breath, and what they saw was not fear. It was victory. He had proved his point. He had forced the Jedi to act like warriors. And in doing so, he had stained the one thing they swore to protect, their code. No monument was raised on Malrev IV. No records stored in the archives. The Jedi Council erased what they could, reclassified what they couldn't, and for a time, it worked. But memories do not die just because the Order wills them to. In the Outer Rim, mercenaries still spoke his name with reverence. On forgotten moons, warriors mimicked his discipline with staff and armor, never knowing who first taught it. And deep within the Force, his presence lingered, not as a ghost, not as a voice, but as a fracture, the kind that splits a foundation, quietly, slowly, until the entire structure forgets why it ever stood tall. Some Jedi began to ask questions. Why had so many fallen to his teachings? Why had so many exiles joined his cause? The answers were buried too deep, and the Council offered only one. He was a Sith, but the ones who had fought him knew better. Desolous had not served a master. He had not bowed to the dark side in ritual or devotion. He had simply broken, and in his breaking, others saw their own reflection. The Order had trained him to be strong, then punished him for being too strong. They had taught him discipline, then feared it, and when he refused to let go of what he believed, they cast him out. He wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last. Years later, when whispers of other fallen Jedi began to echo through the galaxy, names like Dooku, Xanatos, Kreia, a few old masters remembered Desolous. Not with pity, not even with hate, but with unease, because each of them, in their own way, had started from the same wound. The wound the Jedi refused to name. The wound of pride, of certainty, of believing that all truth must fit within one temple. Desolous had not shattered the Jedi with a superweapon. He had fractured them with doubt, with questions they could not unask. Even after his death, that was his legacy. Not domination, not destruction, but the echo of a single truth, that the Jedi could be wrong. That their silence, their refusal to see, had created him. And that silence, left untouched, would create others. So the galaxy moved on, new wars came, new Sith rose. The archives filled with newer tragedies. But in the corners of ancient halls, in the quiet pause between breath and battle, the memory of Desolous still waited. Not as a warning, not as a curse, but as a shadow that no light could fully erase. The Jedi tried to erase him, but erasure is not destruction. It is preservation, disguised as denial. In the years following Malrev IV, the Council sealed away everything that bore Desolous's mark. The reports, the tactical archives, even the testimonies of the survivors. Every document was classified under the same phrase, non-essential to Jedi continuity. They feared that studying him would repeat him. But history does not vanish when it is locked away. It waits. Hidden among the restricted archives, sealed behind biometric codes, fragments of Desolous's writings remained. Not holocrons. He had never trusted the Order's technology. Just transcriptions, copied by those who studied under him before the Purge. Lines written not with passion, but with clarity. Peace is not the absence of war. It is the surrender of preparation. To the Council, it was blasphemy. To younger Jedi, it was dangerous. But to those who had seen battle, those who had buried comrades under smoldering skies, it felt true. And truth, once felt, does not unroot easily. The Order tried to repair its image through restraint. They banned aggressive forms, they forbade the use of cortosis-based weapons, and they replaced the term combat training with defensive form meditation. But the wound was too deep, the cracks too wide. They could suppress the philosophy, but not the feeling. That feeling lived on in whispers, in private lessons taught after hours, in the subtle shifts of training droids reprogrammed to mimic real aggression, in masters who had once fought Desolous and secretly believed he had been right. They never said it aloud. But when a Padawan questioned the balance between defense and survival, those masters didn't correct them. They just said, "Be ready." The Council called it vigilance, but it wasn't. It was fear, quiet, disciplined, institutional fear, the fear of ever meeting another Desolous. Some of his methods began to reappear, not openly, not under his name. A new generation of Jedi began to experiment with weaponless sparring, kinetic grounding, cortosis-resistant training armor. The same innovations he had pioneered centuries earlier, now reintroduced as adaptive combat instruction. The irony was perfect. The Order was teaching the ghost of the man it tried to forget, and every time a young knight survived a duel because of those techniques, the Force remembered. But the darkness that followed was not all Jedi-born. Outside the Republic, mercenary groups found fragments of his tactics etched into old Republic databanks. Strategists and bounty guilds copied them. Even the Mandalorians studied them, adapting the idea of precision over passion, rhythm over rage. And slowly, Desolous became a myth again. Not as a man, as a concept. Some said he had been a Sith. Others claimed he was a rogue Jedi who had died unnamed. But the truth didn't matter anymore, because the lesson was alive, and it no longer belonged to him. On Coruscant, one archivist uncovered a data chip that survived centuries of erasure. It contained fragments of dialogue from Desolous's final training sessions. No Force teachings, no Sith sermons. Only this: emotion weakens nothing. Unfocused emotion does. She presented it to the Council for review. They never responded. By the next rotation, the chip was gone. Deleted. Like he had been. Like they all were. But words don't need records to survive. They need believers. And belief, once ignited, finds new vessels. It found them in the field generals of the later Clone Wars, in the precision of Form V, in the defensive aggression of Jedi who balanced compassion with necessity. They didn't know his name, but they fought with his logic. When peace finally collapsed again, and the galaxy returned to war, Desolous's teachings resurfaced in every corner of conflict. The Force remembered its scar. And in the hum of a lightsaber before battle, you could almost hear it, that same stillness he carried before every strike. He was gone, but his discipline was not. It had evolved beyond him, beyond the Sith, beyond the Jedi. It had become what he always wanted it to be. Not dogma, not doctrine, a truth that needed no name. Time passed. Wars changed names. Empires rose and fell. But something quiet remained, hidden beneath the surface of every disciplined soldier, every guarded Jedi, every hardened warrior, who understood what it meant to fight without hope. They didn't know his face. They didn't know his name, but they moved like him. On Iridonia, Zabrak martial instructors rediscovered a movement style that mirrored Desolous's stance training: rooted heels, forward drive, minimal waist. They called it low gate grounding. They thought it was ancient. It wasn't. It was his. On Kuat, security tacticians wrote manuals on melee coordination in confined spaces. Their opening theory: if your mind hesitates, your body dies. A translation of one of Desolous's forgotten dictums, buried deep in the rubble of Malrev the Force. The copies had outlived the creator. Even within the Jedi Order, his influence remained more in silence than in speech. Some knights taught their students to anticipate not the strike, but the rhythm behind it. To sense the pattern, not the blade. To defeat an enemy before the enemy understood itself. They never said where they learned it, but it was not in the temple. It was in the fear. Because once you've been changed by a war, you start to pass that change on not as advice, but as instinct. And Desolous had changed the Jedi, even those who never met him, even those born after his death. He had shown them that the line between preparation and obsession was thin. That power didn't always come from passion. Sometimes it came from control. And those who remembered him not by name, but by method lived by that code. Some were bounty hunters, some were ex-Jedi, some were clone commanders who learned to think 2 moves ahead because they were trained by generals who had read between the lines of forgotten wars. All of them fought with silence. All of them fought with purpose. None of them cared about titles. Desolous would have smiled at that. In the Outer Rim, warlords began to rebuild ancient academies using fragments from abandoned Republic archives. One in particular, carved into the side of a crater moon, taught a program they called Echo Blade Doctrine. No lightsabers, no force, just brutal, focused, calculated melee tactics, unemotional, efficient. They claimed it was based on old Mandalorian manuals, but that wasn't true. The founding instructor had once served as a bodyguard for a Jedi Knight who had fallen at Malrev IV. He never spoke of that day, but he never forgot it. That's how legacy spreads, not in blood, not in name, in fragments. Some Jedi Masters began referring to an unnamed first schism in combat philosophy, a quiet rebellion inside the Order long before the Sith Wars. They didn't say his name, but they taught around him, against him, because of him, and in doing so, they preserved him. In a way, Desolous had predicted this. He once told a student, "My name will not survive, but my logic will." And that's all that matters. He was right. The logic became doctrine. The doctrine became tradition. And the tradition became instinct. And when war returned again, real war, with clones, with dark armor, with Jedi generals stripped of ceremony, the galaxy didn't need to remember Desolous, because they were already fighting like him. The defensive forms collapsed under pressure. The pacifist teachings were replaced with war councils and field promotions. The council that once feared his teachings became the teachers of a war they couldn't control. Desolous would not have taken pleasure in that. He would have just nodded. He had never wanted fame, only acknowledgement, and even in death, he got it not through statues or sermons, but through muscle memory, sharpened instincts, and the quiet moments before battle when a warrior asks themselves, "Am I ready?" If the answer is yes, that's when Desolous lives again. Because that was always his gift. Not power, not prophecy, clarity. And in a galaxy that kept repeating its own mistakes, clarity was rare. It was dangerous. it was sacred. The warriors who remembered him did not build monuments. They built readiness. They taught the next generation to survive what they could not name. And in that unspoken transfer of wisdom, he endured. Names disappear, even great ones. The galaxy is vast, its history long, and even the most powerful figures eventually become whispers, then echoes, then dust. But not all legacies need names. Desolous never ruled an empire, never wore a crown, never built a throne, and yet his shadow touched places even Sith Lords could not reach. Because he wasn't trying to conquer the galaxy. He was trying to prove it wrong, and in doing so, he changed it quietly, completely, and without permission. Jedi historians eventually called him a cautionary tale, a lesson in unchecked warlust. But their own students disagreed, not because they supported him, but because they understood him. And understanding, in time, becomes preservation. In remote archives, copies of his tactics remained sealed, restricted, flagged for study only under supervision. But the Order never truly destroyed his teachings. They couldn't. Because too many Jedi had seen the truth. Too many had stood on Malrev the Force and felt the cost, felt the contradiction, felt the blur between obedience and denial. And when the Clone Wars erupted centuries later, when Jedi were once again turned into soldiers, when discipline began to replace doctrine, it wasn't because of Desolous, but it felt like his return. Not in flesh, not in spirit, but in philosophy. The Force doesn't remember names. It remembers impact. And impact lingers in the places no one visits, in training sabers that feel heavier than they should, in old battle recordings played late at night by masters who wonder if their students will survive. Desolous became part of those moments. He became the question behind the silence, the pause before the lesson, the memory no one wanted to admit they still carried. And when Jedi began to fall again to fear, to war, to their own doubts, his teachings became relevant not because they were right, but because they were honest. Even Sith Lords, in time, studied fragments of his style, not for ideology, for efficiency, because Desolous didn't fight for darkness, he fought for clarity. And clarity has no allegiance. It just cuts. One motion, one thought, one truth that the galaxy cannot be saved by hope alone. And once you believe that, you are no longer Jedi, but you are not Sith either. You are something else. That's the space Desolous lived in. And that's why his legacy survived. Even Revan's followers, decades earlier, whispered of warriors who sought order through dominance, not out of hatred, but out of exhaustion. They were not quoting him, but they were echoing him. And every time a council refused to act, every time a master silenced a student's question, every time peace was chosen over preparation, he returned, not as a ghost, but as a flaw. And flaws persist. They pass between generations not as warnings, but as instincts. In exile, some Jedi rediscovered his doctrine not by looking outward, but inward, seeing in themselves the same fractures that had once broken him. And rather than hide from it, they learned. That was his legacy, not destruction, not victory. Instruction. He showed what happened when the Jedi refused to adapt, when truth was dismissed because it didn't fit tradition. When order became obedience, and obedience became blindness, that lesson outlived him. And in that lesson, he became immortal, because in the end, Desolous did not seek followers. He trained no apprentice, left no dynasty. But his story didn't need continuation. It only needed remembrance. And even those who didn't know his name, those who walked through ruins, read half-burned texts, felt tension in the way certain battles were fought. They felt him. They felt the pull of clarity over comfort, of readiness over ritual, of truth over peace. And in that moment, Desolous was not gone. He was there, standing in the space between codes, between lies, between victories, watching, not to be worshipped, not to be mourned, only to be understood, because that was all he ever wanted. Not redemption, not fear, not rule, just to be seen. And across the centuries, across forgotten moons, lost battlefields, and faded memories, he was. The Jedi Order had no funeral for him, no tomb, no statue, no name etched into stone. They didn't mourn him. They erased him. What was once a knight of the Republic had become something shameful, a scar they refused to look at. And so, in the years after Malrev IV, the temple grew quiet, not with peace, but with denial. Desolous was gone, but no one spoke of him. Not the masters, not the archives, not even the Force itself. His records were sealed beneath layers of restricted access, stripped of emotion, stripped of history, a brief mention of rebellion, a footnote under dangerous teachings, and nothing more. But silence is not justice, it is not healing. And the Force does not forget even when the Jedi try to. In the darkened corridors of the archives, some whispers remained. Younglings spoke in hushed voices about the Pauan warrior who trained Jedi to fight like Sith. Knights debated if his war was one of vengeance or of betrayal. No one knew the truth, because those who did refused to speak. Even the High Council, in private, avoided his name. To them, he had become a contagion, a memory that could spread if spoken aloud. He was not remembered for his victories, not for his discipline, only for his fall. But the Force doesn't hold grudges, it simply echoes, and Desolous echoed in strange ways. In the decades after his death, some Jedi began to dream of war. Not conquest, not power, but defense, real defense, the kind Desolous had once begged the Council to understand. Some Jedi dismissed the visions, others feared them, but a few understood. They saw planets fall because Jedi hesitated. They watched comrades die because peace had made them slow. And in the back of their minds, a question grew. Had Desolous truly been wrong, or had he simply been too soon? But the Order was built on silence, and silence does not allow questions. So Desolous remained a shadow, not a Sith Lord, not a martyr, just a name that couldn't be spoken, but refused to disappear. Even as new wars came and went, and the galaxy spun forward, something stayed still. A feeling, like someone watching, not in anger, not in hatred, but in warning. The Jedi called it unease, but some called it truth, because they knew a warrior like Desolous doesn't vanish. He sinks into the cracks, he waits in the blind spots, and he teaches, even when no one's listening. The Order had cleansed his name from their archives, but the Force had already written it somewhere else. In memory, in guilt, in the quiet thoughts of those who no longer trusted the code. They didn't need to read about him. They felt him, and even if they never said it aloud, they remembered. While the Jedi buried him in silence, the Sith did the opposite. They studied him, they recorded him, they remembered. In the ancient vaults of Korriban, centuries after his death, the archives still spoke his name, not with reverence, but with curiosity. Among relics of true Sith Lords and tyrants, a single entry glowed red: Desolous, Pauan tactician, denied by Jedi, destroyer of balance. He was not one of them. He never followed the rule of two. He never swore loyalty to the dark. But the Sith understood something the Jedi never could: that knowledge, even in failure, holds power. And Desolous was a study in that power. To the Sith, he was proof of corruption within the Jedi Order. A warrior molded by light, broken by discipline, and reforged in defiance. A lesson in what happens when faith is forced into obedience. So they preserved him, his battles, his strategies, his words, each encoded into red holocrons marked doctrine of precision. They called it art, a method of controlled warfare, a way to wage battle without waste to make victory inevitable. Centuries later, Sith apprentices would kneel before his hologram, watching his pawns, reconstructed image move through combat drills. The eyes were wrong, the voice synthetic, but the technique flawless. He became a phantom teacher. One the Sith didn't worship, but feared. Because even in death, Desolous reminded them that darkness without discipline was weakness, and that idea frightened them more than the Jedi ever could. His likeness appeared in training chambers not as a lord, but as a test. Apprentices were ordered to face him in simulated duels. Some lasted minutes, most lasted seconds. And every failure taught the same truth: Desolous didn't need the Force to kill you. He was still teaching, long after he died. One Sith Lord wrote in his private journals, he was not Sith, he was something worse, a believer who stopped believing. Another called him the heretic of both orders, and the title stayed. When holocrons were smuggled to Dromund Kaas and Ziost, his simulation was expanded, refined, updated, made faster, colder, deadlier. Each century, new Sith added layers to his data. His movements became smoother, his voice clearer, until even the historians couldn't tell where the real Desolous ended and the myth began. But that didn't matter, because by then, the lesson had evolved. Desolous no longer belonged to the Sith or Jedi. He belonged to history as the embodiment of a truth neither side wanted to face. That belief, without balance, destroys itself. The Jedi buried his name. The Sith preserved his memory. And both, in their own way, ensured that Desolous would never truly die. It began in secret, long after the fall of the Republic, long after the Jedi were hunted to extinction. Inside the hidden training halls of the Sith, Desolous returned again, not in spirit, but in simulation. The Empire had found him, or rather, the ghost of him. Buried deep within an ancient Sith archive, coded in binary within a corrupted holocron recovered from Korriban's lower tombs. Most dismissed it as corrupted data, but Darth Vader did not. He saw potential. He ordered the data reconstructed. What emerged was a digital shadow, a perfect mimicry of Desolous's combat style, restored from centuries-old fragments. A phantom, bound in code, built for one purpose, to test. And so it became part of the apprentices' trials. Those who would serve the Empire had to face him. Not the real Desolous, not even a ghost, but something colder, a reflection built from the pure logic of his discipline. The first time Vader's apprentice entered the chamber, the hologram waited in silence. No taunts, no speeches, just a stance. Balanced, still. Then it moved, not fast, deliberate. Every step calculated, every strike designed not to kill, but to teach. The apprentice fought back with fury, the red blade cutting through smoke and static. But rage didn't work here. The hologram anticipated it, countered it, used it. Every emotion became a weakness. Every outburst met precision. Desolous had always taught that a warrior's power lay not in strength, but in stillness. and even as Data, he proved it. When the duel ended, the chamber was silent again. The apprentice had survived barely. Vader watched from behind the observation glass. He said nothing, but in that silence, something passed between them, understanding. Because Vader had once been a Jedi too, and he knew exactly what Desolous had been trying to show them all. The simulation became infamous. Some called it the Powan trial, others the lesson of clarity. Those who failed never returned. Those who passed never forgot. Over time, the hologram grew stronger. Adaptive code, learning algorithms. Each apprentice who faced it unknowingly trained it to be better. And by the time the last of Vader's chosen entered that room, Desolous's shadow moved almost like a living thing. Not human, not alive, but aware. Each duel ending the same way, with silence, stillness, and a single echo in the Force. He wasn't there, but his will was. Still teaching, still watching, still reminding the galaxy what the Jedi had tried to forget. That even the perfect code can break when it believes in nothing but itself. The holocron was lost again. Not destroyed, only misplaced. Time does that to all things. Empires collapse, archives burn, and even ghosts grow quiet. But Desolous's image still moved somewhere in the dark, trapped in data, teaching anyone who dared to open it. Centuries passed. The galaxy rebuilt itself again and again. New governments, new orders, new wars. The names changed, but the patterns stayed the same. And in every age, someone rediscovered him. Sometimes it was a Sith acolyte, sometimes a curious scholar, sometimes a soldier who didn't believe in either side. Each found a fragment, a line, a stance, a doctrine. And each, in their own way, felt what the Jedi once feared: clarity. He no longer needed form or voice to endure. He had become an idea, one that lived in the space between codes and convictions. When one side grew arrogant, his memory resurfaced. When the other grew reckless, his discipline returned. He was not balance, he was correction. Even the Jedi eventually spoke his name again, though rarely, whispered among historians who questioned the Council's version of events. They said his downfall was not madness, it was revelation. That he saw what they refused to see, that peace without readiness is illusion. Those words became dangerous again. They always did. So the Council sealed them once more. And still, he taught. Through the faint hum of training sabers, through the stillness before battle, through the tension between compassion and control. He was there, unseen, unnamed, unacknowledged. A phantom in every generation that believed too deeply in its own perfection. When the Empire finally fell, the archives scattered. Some were lost to pirates, others hidden by survivors. But in one abandoned Imperial vault on Mustafar, a droid once powered up after centuries of silence, its flickering eyes found an old program still running. Designation: Desolous Protocol. It replayed endlessly, a holographic figure striking, parrying, pausing, teaching. No sound, no purpose, just motion, unbroken, eternal. And somewhere in the Force, the echo of his life remained, not as darkness, not as light, but as inevitability. Because Desolous had never been either. He was the shadow of truth cast by both. The Jedi had feared him. The Sith had used him. But neither understood him. He didn't want followers. He didn't want worship. He only wanted to be remembered for what he tried to show them. That strength without discipline is chaos. And peace without strength is a lie. He died alone, forgotten, erased. But the galaxy he left behind could never unlearn what he had taught it. And so, long after his armor rusted into dust, and his story sank into legend, His presence lingered not in temples, not in tombs, but in the mind of every warrior who ever asked a single question. What is the cost of peace?